Hello, everybody. Good evening. I am here with our esteemed guest for tonight. This is Darren Schaefer. Everyone knows him. He's probably, I would say, the most popular guy in the Vortex, without question,
And the most
y-
humble.
and the most humble. Yes, you are universally loved, I would say. So here we go. We've got Darren in the pot. We got Darren on the show finally, and we're just gonna shoot the bull about Cooper for as long as we feel like it. Me and Darren can have some long conversations about this stuff. So maybe we'll have another one today. So anyway, let me make sure that we sound okay. So everybody, let us know, obviously, how we sound. That's always the big thing. That there's no echoes, nothing weird going on. Darren and I are professionals. We're professional nerds.
Absolutely.
So usually there won't be any. Can you hear me now? Where's that echo? Turn that down. Caller, turn your radio down. None of that stuff. All systems go, everybody says. Okay, great. So let's jump into this. I want to talk about first how your opinions have changed on this case over the years. We've had such great opinions change over the years. I know that, for example, let's start out with, we'll jump right into it. Your opinion on the bomb has changed a good bit. Drastically. So tell me about that.
Yeah. First coming into this case, what I read about the bomb, people I talked to about it, it sort of was universally agreed upon that it was most likely fake. And I think people would have even leaned into it was definitely fake.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in that camp. Like, I just don't see it being real. I don't see a need for it to be real. It's like I've always said, it's a cartoon description of a bomb. Like that's what's going to be in Bugs Bunny's briefcase. Yep. And so I thought it was fake. But the more I've learned about this case, the more I've talked to people, the more I am leaning towards it being real. I would say I'm 60% the bomb was real, 40% it was fake.
Yeah. I think I'm getting there too. I'm kind of more probable than not that it was real.
Because I just can't get over the fact if he's on the ground in Reno or even Seattle, and they say, you know what, we're just not going to let this happen. The pilots escape from the ship, they rush the plane, whatever ends up happening, but they're not going to let him take off. Then he's stuck there in the most embarrassing situation of all time.
Yeah.
Imagine having to walk off that plane with your fake bomb.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, he certainly would have had a contingency if the bomb wasn't real. I do think that real or not, I do believe that he had a pistol with him in his bag. I think that's, like I said, I've looked into all of the copycats, and literally all of them carried pistols with them, hidden or otherwise. All of them. So I
agree. I think it's likely he had a pistol,
yeah.
But we don't know.
We don't know, but we do know that he had a bomb of some sort. Your point is it would be embarrassing, and he has said multiple times to Tina that he wasn't going to be taken alive. Now that could just be, they'll never catch me, but this guy was doing something very dangerous. So I do think he was prepared to die that day. Would you agree?
Yeah, he was definitely prepared to die that day.
Yeah, and this was not a joke, he was not the mentally ill type that we did see people like not Garrett Trepnow. Gosh, I forget his name. The three cheeseburgers guy. He was actually killed in a second attempt. His first attempt failed when he got drugged by the stewardesses, famously. Glenn something.
Glenn Tripp.
Glenn Tripp, that's it. Yep, Glenn Tripp. And he actually was killed the second time. He did a second attempt, and they didn't know it was him that time, right? If they had known it was him, then they probably would have known that they could have negotiated with him, and that he was essentially harmless. I think he was about 20 years old, and he had mental disabilities. And they did go on the plane and shoot him. They killed him. And I talked to John Detler about that. He was still there but when this happened. And he was on the plane, and he didn't shoot him per se, but he was there. And yeah, he said it was real tragic, if they had known that. But regardless, Cooper was not that sort, I don't believe.
Unless he's a Ted Braden type, then then it's not that he's prepared to die. He's confident that he's going to pull this off. The bomb is real, and he's perfectly comfortable jumping out of a plane with a real bomb.
I think that's where it goes. Yeah. And obviously, the thing is, the bomb, we've always said the bomb didn't need to be real, right?
It doesn't need to be real.
But why would he make such a convincing forgery when he didn't need to? I mean, he literally could have just said, I have a bomb, and that's all that was required.
And if it is a fake bomb, assemble it with gloves and leave it on the plane as a joke.
Sure.
Like, all right, the bomb was fake the whole time. I got away with the money, and here's my fake bomb.
That's actually what happened with Heinemann, with Richard LaPointe, his hijacking. His bomb was left there, and it was, road flares and things like that. So they did do that. So what we do know that they did keep some of them did keep the bombs on there just to say ha ha, or just who cares, right? But I do believe he threw it out the back of the plane. I mean, don't you think so? He didn't jump with it.
I mean, if it's thrown out of the back of the plane, why haven't we found it?
There's a lot of land up there, though, where he would have.
I know, but if you're a hunter walking around those woods, you're aware of what happened. And if you found a briefcase with what looked like a suspicious looking device inside, I'm telling you, a 47-year-old man roaming through the woods in 1977, his first thought would have been, this has got to be DB Cooper's.
Sure. And he would have. I would counter that, though, and say that there's, I used to go in the woods a whole lot, and you generally follow trails. You don't go off the trails. There's natural trails where deer walk and things like that. And that's what humans stick to. There's a whole lot of land people don't ever encounter deep in the woods. So
I know, but hunters do walk through the brush.
True. Hunters will go off the path. True.
And that area is well hunted.
I mean, they found the 2 placards, right? I believe there's 2.
And to my point, people are looking for things in the woods. Oh, this could be DB Cooper's.
Yeah, although I guess another counter to that would be that they never found McNally's attaché case. Mac threw his briefcase out the back into open farm country, and they knew exactly where he jumped, and they never found it. And
that's a good point.
So it's, and I know that McCoy, I believe that they didn't find one of his suitcases he threw out was still missing, so they never found that either. Now, again, there's a lot of land where McCoy was in the plane for a long time back there, but Cooper was, I don't know, somewhere between south of Tacoma and north of Lewis River. That briefcase might be out there. I just don't see any reason for him to overload his body. I think that the way that Tina saw him geared up was probably the way that he jumped out in that last
I'd
time.
agree.
Unless there was, it's possible that the bag, though, right? The mystery bag had gloves and things like that in it. So he may have put those on very quickly before he jumped, goggles and things. But the way he was accoutered, his accoutrements, we'd say, I think he was already, everything was fine. It's like when they say, did he stuff money was there any money in the dummy chute? Right? I don't believe so, because I think that when Tina saw him, the bag was already wrapped up 1,000,000 times. And I don't think he was going to unwrap that to do that. So, yeah, so the bomb, but your opinion has changed on that. And like I said, I agree. I do think that if it was a fake, it was a unnecessarily convincing fake. It didn't need to be like that. But, we do know that, and we know now from Tom Kay and I tell this story often, that we were at CooperCon and we were at the table with Tom Voigt, of all people, the Zodiac guy, and we were talking about this, and Tom had never actually seen the description of the bomb from Tina, where she goes into detail about exactly what it looked like. He had never actually seen that, and he goes, that's interesting. And he saw that there was a battery the size of her arm, is what Tina says, right? She's referring to a 9-volt battery that they used to have, flashlight batteries back then.
A lantern battery.
Right. Yeah. And Tom wanted to know, could that set off a blasting cap for dynamite? And there just so happened to be a guy at the table whose brother was a Hollywood pyrotechnics guy. And he called him and said, hey, we're at the table up here in Portland, and we're talking about this. What is the amps or voltage, I'm not familiar, needed to set off blasting caps? And it was definitely enough. Whatever juice was in that battery would have set off a blasting cap. if it had been done. And I know that Georgia, I think, got with some Marines or something, and they made a fake bomb. They made Cooper's bomb, and it went off. So it was a unnecessarily convincing fake, which makes you think it might have been real. No other hijacker I've ever encountered had a bomb that looked like that was that thorough. So, yeah. Do you have any other opinions that have changed as far as like what you kind of person you think he was?
I mean, that changes all the time. It changes depending on which suspect I'm reading about. So
I know. So I know I'm the same way. You jump back and forth. You're like, oh, he was a badass, and no, he was a wuss. No, he was a nerd. No, he was pretending to be a nerd. It's just hard.
Yeah, and I'm gullible, so I'll talk to someone or be reading a book, and they're pointing him out to be, that he's a criminal, that he did this really bad stuff, and that he put all these lives in danger. And I'm like, yeah, what a scumbag. And then, I'm reading something else, and I'm like, he was a badass. It was amazing what he did. What an incredible feat. And he pulled it off, and he got away with it.
Well, what was when you talk to Gossett's son, Gossett is strange to me because I don't know if Gossett was a phony tough guy or if he genuinely had that in him to be a tough guy. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, I can't.
Yeah.
He seems like a phony in some ways.
I don't know how to answer that. I think part of it is just because he was kind of a little bit of a smaller guy. So maybe it's some of that like Napoleon syndrome kind of a thing where
he wanted to do all these things. Well, it's like with Gossett, though, he was in the Marines, he was in the Army, and he was in the Air Force. I've never known anybody who did his world tour of U.S. service branches like that. That's crazy. And I thought that was bullcrap, actually, when I saw that. I heard that somewhere, and I looked it up, and sure enough, he really was in all three services. And so he did have training, and was it Greg said that they used to go drop him off in the woods, right?
Yeah. They used to drop him off at one point and then like, hey, pick me up in 4 days over there.
Yeah. So if that's true, then, and like I've discussed this with you before, you didn't get the sense, you got the sense that Greg Gossett was earnest in what he was saying.
Oh, 100%. And I'll point this out that, I sought him out. He wasn't like, hey, I want to come on the show. I was like, hey, I listened to his interview on Coast to Coast.
Mm.
And I was like, man, I'd love to talk to that guy someday. So I just reached out to him and he said, yeah, that's no problem. I drove to Salt Lake to do the interview and he wanted to have dinner with me before. And I really didn't want to do that because we'd talk about things and then I'd have to talk about them again on the show. But what I got out of that dinner was just that he was trying to figure out if I was being honest and if I was trying to push some sort of agenda,
right,
or, I'm making some doc and I want to feature Gossett, but my real suspect is Rackstraw.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, hey, I listened to an episode or two this week and, it seems like you're heavily into this.
Right.
But it seems like you were being honest with everyone. And he's just like, I just ask that you treat me the same way. And I was like, 100%.
And so you felt, there was no reason for him to make any of this up. He didn't care. He has a comfortable life, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And this isn't part of his life. This is a story that his dad told him that he has been able to confirm or deny. He's not seeking this out himself. He's not on the DB Cooper forum at night. This is just something that was a part of his life. And if we told him that, Wolfgang is 100% eliminated, he'd just be like, okay, moving on. Right. And if we said it's 100% DB Cooper, he'd be like, okay, that's pretty cool. Moving on.
Yeah. I just, like I said, I just can't ever tell with Wolfgang because he's such an eccentric, right? He was such an eccentric that I don't know whether he was genuinely tough or not, but that shouldn't dissuade me from thinking that. But Gossett, it was interesting when I did Suspect Roulette with Marty Andrade, and I drew. I believe that actually so Marty drew Gossett and defended him, and I had to attack Gossett. And honestly, I had a tough time. It was interesting. I thought I would be able to kick Gossett's ass as a suspect, but I really couldn't. I just couldn't. I know that it was interesting. So really, he's kind of a B tier suspect to me. I would not fall backwards out of my chair if it turned out to be Gossett. I would not. And if it was Rekka or somebody, then I would certainly have a heart attack and drop dead. But if it was Gossett, I wouldn't be like so out of control shocked. Would you?
No, not at all. I would be excited. I would be excited it's Gossett.
Yeah, he was a weird guy. And somebody asked if he had CIA connections. I don't think so. I don't think Gossett was like that. But, Gossett does have this. It's fascinating that Gossett really does have that weird neck thing going on there in that photograph.
Absolutely.
He does have that. But his problems are his eyebrows are strange. But again, Cooper's eyes were limited, in people seeing his eyes. His nose is a little big. I don't like his nose, but he doesn't really particularly have a pouty lip. And Gossett has if you watch the video of Gossett, Gossett actually has a facial tick in a way. I don't know if you've ever, if you watch the video of him when he's talking about his doing exorcisms, he's blinking like he has a tick or something, a facial tick. Just strange. So I don't know, but I would not be floored if it was Gossett. Right.
I would be curious if he actually had that tick or it was some sort of performance as part of that character.
That's a good point. I mean, this is a guy who hosted. I mean, he was in entertainment in a way, right? I mean, he was certainly in the entertainment business, of that. Let's see. So watch his lip when he talks. It's very strange. Okay. So let's see. You grew up though you grew up right in Cooper country, right?
I did. One more thing about Gossett. I was talking to my friend Ben about him one time, and I was, he's went to 2 different lawyers to do these confessions. That's how serious it was. And he's like, oh, the paranormal investigator and exorcist, that guy that's so serious and honest. And I was like, yeah, no. There's that.
That's the problem with Gossett is he's just there's so much bullshit in his life but then again, if you believe what Greg says, then maybe so. But I just don't know if Gossett was the type who would be willing to spend his life in prison. I just don't think that. I don't get that vibe from him. I don't think
I got the vibe that in 70 and 71, his life was kind of falling apart.
True. Maybe it
by his own means.
Right. And, let's see, somebody says, wasn't he LDS? Gossett was married actually in a Mormon church. So either he married an LDS woman or he was originally.
He was LDS for a while.
And then he became a Catholic.
Yes.
So do you know if he was originally LDS? Like, was he born into that?
No, I believe it was. I'd have to go back and listen to the episode, but I believe it was like the first wife was LDS. Yes. And then so she got him to convert.
That makes sense because, like I said, I know I found where he was married in an LDS church, his first marriage. I just didn't know if that was he was married into it or if he was. But you think he was married? He was married into it, probably.
Yes, because Greg grew up LDS, so I believe it was that.
Well, but that would have been Greg's mother. Obviously, his first wife was Greg's mother. So he did remarry though.
I think so, didn't he? Or he was a crazy womanizer, so I don't know if any of those were marriages.
Well, you know what? We never got Galen's book on Gossett. So
no, we didn't. And I've reached out to Galen, and the last time I reached out to him, which was years ago, he was just like, "Well, the book's going to come out, and when the book does come out, I'll promote it on your show." Okay.
That was years ago. Yeah. See, somebody, Galen just abruptly left the Vortex, and it just made me wonder if he found out something about Gossett that was just like, this can't be him.
Bruce said he stayed in touch with him, and his life just got busy and he got off track. But I wonder that too, if that story got to a certain point where they saw the end and it wasn't the end that they wanted.
All right.
Do you broadcast that? If this is something you had worked on, Ryan, it's for sure. O.J. Simpson is D.B. Cooper, without a doubt. The timeline, everything, it makes perfect sense. You work on this for years, and then at the last minute, you find out 100% it wasn't O.J. Simpson. Do you
No.
publicly say, "Hey, I was wrong about that"?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that integrity, I don't know if it's being an attorney or something. I don't know, but like, I don't want to publish something that is untruthful. Right. And it's the same reason why I never wanted to never wanted to go to the media about Vordal, even though Vordal is still a compelling suspect in many ways. I never wanted to go to the media with him. And that was the difference in like me and Eric with Vincent Peterson is I was never going to go to the media to where I'm on record in a newspaper accusing someone of a capital crime. And then I'm like, oh, well, my bad. I don't ever want to be flippant about it like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, as opposed to me that's done it, 73 times?
Well, no, but it's a little different. But you're not going to the media though. So, but
No.
I'm going to talk about like your upbringing in Cooper country, right?
Yeah.
Woodland is that where you're from, right?
Yeah, I bounced around all around the Portland, Vancouver metro area.
Okay, so not, but like did you go to Woodland High School, for example, or something like that?
I actually went to Winlock High School.
And where is that?
That's about 60 miles north of Portland.
Okay. Oh no. Okay. So you're okay. So wow. See, I didn't know. It's funny. My geography is so messed up. Is that near Centralia, sort of?
Yeah, it is. It's about 30 miles south of, or 20 miles south of Centralia, Chehalis.
Yeah, because like I look at the maps all the time. We're just stuck in these flight path maps and things, and I look at these cities, and there's not a ton of cities between Tacoma and Vancouver, really. I mean, there's some, but I know Centralia
It's pretty rural.
Yeah, right. And I know that Centralia and Chehalis is kind of in between. I would say Tacoma and Vancouver. Wouldn't you say it's kind of in the middle there?
In between there, you've got in between like Olympia and Vancouver. Basically, you've got Centralia, Chehalis, and then you have Longview. The cities.
And then south of that is Woodland, is right south of Longview, right?
Yep.
Right.
Woodland's about 15 miles south of Longview, 10 miles south of Longview.
So when was the first time that you went to Ariel?
The first time I went to Ariel would have been, I think 13 and 14.
Okay.
I went to DB Cooper days, or 12 and 13. One of those two. I went back to back. Those are the first time I went to DB Cooper days, but I'd been to the Ariel store the first time. Gosh, it would have been like 2006.
Okay. And did you go there specifically for DB Cooper?
No.
It was just
no. I went because it was just this cool place out in the woods.
Okay.
On a road that me and my friends traveled on all the time, Lewis River Road, or going up to the backside of Mount St. Helens, going camping. Okay. We would drive out Lewis River Road all the time.
So there
was this bar out in the middle of nowhere.
Sure.
What I loved most about it, especially in like closer to 2010 and after, is they would just be open whenever they felt like it.
Right.
So there would be times where you would go and it would be closed. And so it became like a treat. So whenever I would drive by, I would stop to see if it was open.
Right.
And if it was, pop in and, well, if I had cash, have a beer, because they were one of the final cash only businesses, because they couldn't get satellite internet that was good enough because of the trees.
Right.
To be able to process credit card transactions.
And was this a serious bar where like people smoked inside the bar? I mean, was it that sort of place? Yes. Yeah. No one cared.
Smoking wasn't allowed in Washington in like 2005 was the last year you could smoke in a bar in Washington.
Yeah, but
you could probably smoke in there a few years after that. And then, if you were in there after hours, like all these small bars do it where, okay, it's closing time, but you four locals, you can stay and hang out with me if you want.
Yeah. Right.
And then at that point, everyone could smoke.
So did you ever go water skiing in Lake Merwin or something? I mean, was that a place where people did that stuff?
Yeah.
So you've been in Lake Merwin?
I have been in Lake Merwin many times.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess people go skiing and tubing and stuff out there. And
yeah, there's a place to swim and you fish out there.
Right. Which again, that's not too far away from like Woodland. That's only 15, 20-minute drive, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
When we'd get a bunch of snow, we would drive out to that park and it'd essentially be closed because of all the snow. And then we'd sled on that hill at Lake Merwin.
Yeah. Ariel, that whole area really is the cause of so much of my head scratching when it comes to Cooper because of the terrain there, right? They love showing the stock footage of that mountain there right next to
Yeah.
Ariel.
Well, I mean, if you're going to get stock footage, you just fly a helicopter over the Lewis River right there. And you got mountains to your left and hills to your right and a
Right.
riverbed, and it's all completely filled with trees.
And that's just not, and the thing is that's not, and we know now that's not really an accurate portrayal of what he jumped into. So I'll ask you the question that you ask everybody: is the flight path correct?
I think it is. I don't see a reason to question it. I mean, show me some evidence that will make me change my mind, and I'll change my mind. But I haven't been swayed by anything that's come up. Could Tina Bar? I can't even in my mind square that Tina Bar is a drop zone.
No,
because the plane would have to be flying over the ocean pretty much.
Yeah, it would be basically flying on the other side of the river for him to land there. He would be in over there. Yeah, it just doesn't make any. And again, it's just like the pilots. These guys were white knuckling it the whole time. They're not going to do anything to deviate outside the norm, right? They were given Victor 23 and they flew Victor 23. That was what they were going to do. There was no reason for them to deviate, do anything that was different or weird and it's like, it's not just the flight path. We've got these DME markers, these things called DMEs, where like these things on the map where the pilots will call, we're passing this specific place. And you can, you don't even really need the Air Force flight path when you've got their DME markers every 5 or 10 minutes saying, here we are checking in. It's just, I don't know, that bugs me. But the drop zone now, but are you swayed by arguments that I've made, arguments that others have made about the drop zone being closer to Vancouver than, say, Woodland?
Oh yeah, I'm totally cool with that.
Yeah.
Is the drop zone in Ariel? Maybe, I don't know. Is the drop zone in Camas? Maybe, I don't know. I don't know where he landed.
But it's not Clay Elum, though.
No, I don't believe it's Clay Elum.
Well, of course.
The first time I heard that, because they held a press conference, and I was like, I was watching it live.
Yeah.
And I had to have been one of like 3 people watching it live. And I remember there were like 2 or 3 people in the room, and they finish. And in that, I was like, Clay Elum? And then they were asked if there were any questions, and I remember there being no questions. And it blew my mind. I was like, no questions.
Of course. Not that anyone would have a question about Clay Elum there, because I doubt anybody that was there would have known about, wait a second, you're saying it's 150 miles away. I've tried to put that on a map before to explain to people. Like, that's literally as if we all thought that Cooper jumped in Philadelphia, and somebody's like, actually, it was Washington, D.C. Like, that's a long way, right? This isn't flippant. Even like with Eric believing that Tina Bar, okay, that's 10 miles away. There could be some bizarro universe where, I don't know, that could be feasible. Maybe a gust of wind blew Cooper. I don't know. Who knows? But Clay Elum is 150 miles away. That is, that's the size of some states, right? This is from like London to Paris, even. It's so wild. And it bugs me about Walt Recca because I can't. And Lisa Story is as sweet as she can be. Like, she's genuinely. Lisa Story is like the Foremans, like just a good people.
Oh yeah.
And,
she's awesome.
But dang, it's just like there's no way that this is even. I can't even like process anything about Walter Recca because of that. And it's the same way with Barb. Right. I've tried to rehab. Maybe you saw recently, I tried to think, I was like, man, maybe she said Woodland And 20 years later, the foreman's right. Oh, it was actually, maybe they brain farted and thought she said Woodburn. Because Barb knew about the skyjacking. She was an early Vortex nerd. So why would she get that so wrong? So I was like, well, maybe they messed it up. But Dave Feudman pointed out that in the book, they're pretty explicit that they think it's Woodburn.
Oh yeah. And, I think he has directions, it's 90 degrees from the Aurora airport on this.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay.
Well, and I would legitimately be willing to entertain a little bit of Barb Dayton if it wasn't for that drop zone. That's a non-starter, really. I mean, is it for you with Barb?
No, maybe she obscured the drop zone on purpose.
For some, okay, you can make that argument. I mean, I don't dislike.
But also, we don't know where Cooper landed.
It's true.
I don't know how much value there is in debating what the drop zone exactly was when it's unlikely we're going to find anything there at this point in time.
Sure. I mean, I agree with you on that. It's not a, and that was always a flight path thing. I always used to kind of yell at Cunningham and some people like that who were really invested in that. But I get it now. Now that I've written this book, I get it. I mean, it's an important academic thing to know, but it's not going to help us.
If Dr. Edwards' book came out November 26th, 1971, it would be extremely valuable.
Sure.
Extremely valuable.
Right. Although Doc's, I call that the mathematics textbook. I will lovingly, I do love Dr. Edwards, but I'm like, that book makes Ambien look like methamphetamine. To me, I glaze over when it comes to the math stuff. I can't handle the math stuff. So that bugs me. But Barb is not a terrible suspect, honestly. The personality.
No, and I think her stock has gone up.
Yeah, well, recently for sure. That's something that's kind of, something that's kind of lately is, yes, for those who don't know, go listen to Darren's latest podcast and you'll hear all about it. It's fascinating stuff. And it makes sense to me because basically if I don't believe Barb is Cooper, but because of that, I do believe that Barb is a known Cooper bullshitter. Right. And
well, that would be well documented.
Right. And I do believe that when Barb was doing all this stuff with the Foremans was in the mid or early 80s. I feel like it wasn't. Does that sound right to you? It was in the 80s when all this was going on.
Yeah, I want to say they met in like 78 or 79.
Right. So it lines up. So this is somebody who's a known Cooper bullshitter. And that's the thing, as I told Dave Feudman this, my buddy Dave, I said to him, because he obviously this is an attack on the Gunther stuff, really, on the validity of Gunther. And he said, well, it's 97% that it's Barb, but he's like, well, maybe it's, is that really that high? Could other people match? And I said, well, look, it's matching 97% to a known Cooper bullshitter of that era. So that makes it even a lot more probable to me, right? That it's not just 97% to somebody down the road. It's 97% somebody who would do this sort of thing and had already done it to other people. So it's interesting. And like Marty pointed out, the stuff in the book about him walking around DC contemplating his new life, and there's Barb getting this surgery, and then going to DC and embarking on this new life. There's a lot of symmetry there. I like that. You agree?
Yes, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I just don't know. Obviously, I would like for there to be more. I wish we had more of these Clara letters, right? To dig into.
Of course.
We only have a few lines, right? And it is interesting that the stamp has male DNA on it, as we know. The one that we found at Himmel's box. It's funny when I pulled that out of the box, I knew that Dave was looking for that, and I pulled that out of a box of all these letters. Himmel's box had this box of letters, and almost all of them were from Joe Weber, and almost all of them were unopened, and I felt really sad. in that moment that we have all these letters that Joe clearly handwrote and took the time to handwrite to Himmelsbach, and he just never opened them, which is interesting because Himmelsbach actually liked Dwayne as a suspect. If you listen to him talk, he thought that Dwayne fit the profile of this complete loser, ex-con sort of guy.
Dwayne would be Himmelsbach's profile.
100%. Probably cussed. We know Dwayne cussed because in the 302s, we have Joe saying that Dwayne used to grab his crotch and say, "Let's get this effing show on the road." And that's in the 302s. So it's like, but Dwayne, as we always discuss, and I know you discussed it the other day with Marty, I'm in complete agreement. I will, if I go on a long trip, I will listen to Collins on your podcast. Those to me
are great.
So great. I mean, I don't know of any other. It's almost like Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. Like as good as those podcasts are, Darren's Tim Collins episodes are so good. He's a really convincing individual.
Oh, 1,000,000%. 1,000,000%. And one of the things that makes him so great, even for me still, is what a mysterious person he is. Like, he's not involved in the Vortex at all anymore. I've had zero communication with him outside of those episodes. Zero.
Right. So it's basically, he's a hit and run artist. He's just in and out.
Yeah. And I welcome it. So Tim, if you're listening to this and you want to do 5 more hours, I'm ready.
Come on the Cooper Sleuth podcast. I'd love to do that too. Every time I listen to it, I go, damn, I sit there and I go, if Dwayne had any aviation experience at all, I would genuinely be intrigued because he really does fit physically, except for the ears. Everything else, except for the ears, is perfect. He has this weird complexion, that he has this hair that has the kind of kink to it, the Marcelled look. It's a little big, I think, maybe. I think Dwayne might be a little too big. Dwayne seemed to be about 6'2", I think, and kind of bulky.
Yeah, he was a meatier guy than what I picture Cooper being.
But, maybe he was hungry for a while and lost some weight.
That's true.
I don't know. But he certainly fits the profile of what some people would look for Cooper. But just the aviation experience, that's something that we've discussed recently to death about Cooper. Cooper almost certainly knew how to fly an airplane. Nobody knows what flaps are. I ostensibly know what flaps are, but I'm not going to know exactly what setting a 727 has for flaps. Who knows this?
Right. Especially in 1971.
Right. This is
much smaller percentage of the general public.
Right. This is pre-internet, and it's I suppose you could go to your local library, but I just don't see that. Plus, I think that Paul Cini is who inspired Cooper. I do think that Cooper was sitting on his couch, saw the paper, saw the news on Cini, and said, "Oh, hold my beer, I can do that." In his brain just was watching it, going, "Oh gosh, it's only 13 days before." Nothing in the Cooper hijacking needed more than 13 days to plan. Would you agree?
I agree.
Yeah,
and I think it's very likely he got his inspiration from that. Either in some level, he knew that this was possible, but maybe didn't think of it as an angle to get money.
Right.
Or the whole thing was inspired by it and was like, "Oh, I'm so much better than that guy. I could pull it off."
Right. And it's like when you're going down the Ted Braden rabbit hole, you can totally see, Ted's a truck driver. He's always on the road. I can see Ted sitting there with a bottle of Coors in whatever lot he's in, hanging out with a lounge lizard or whatever, there being a truck driver, and he sees the paper about Cini or sees it on the TV there and goes, "Oh my God, I could kick the hell out of that tomorrow." Like that would be, I always joke about Braden jumping into Clark County. This is a guy who jumped into like North Vietnam in Laos alone with like 2 other guys. I cannot begin to fathom how terrifying that would be. So for him to jump into outside Portland is a Wednesday night.
Yeah, and we know for a guarantee he had night jumps into the woods.
Yes, but he literally taught the South Vietnamese army to do just that. So
right. And one thing I like to ask people is like, Ryan, do you have any experience piloting submarines?
No.
So would you ever commit a crime where your only escape is on a submarine that you have to pilot?
Yep.
No. And he's planning this. Cooper plans this as a night jump. There is no way you take a 250 flight to Seattle that you're going to hijack. In best case scenario, that takes off from Seattle at like 4:15 or something. That's still a night jump in November in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, I was
so
shocked.
He knows he's jumping at night. There's a good chance he's jumping into the woods. And I had that SEAL and PJ on my show, Matt Lamadou. And I thought it was so interesting when I asked him how he would do this, if he was going to. He said he would plan a water jump. Because for him, that is the insanely dangerous but totally executable jump for him that no one's going to find him. His best escape in his mind is to land in the water. Right. And so if you're Ted Braden, where can you jump that no one is going to find you? Oh, I can jump into the woods at night. And where in the continental United States is there crazy woods?
That'd be the place. Man, somebody just said John List is a dead ringer for Cooper.
He is. Sure. He is, and disappeared like 3 weeks before the hijacking.
Right. But alas, we have 302s where they showed List's photographs to the stewardesses and they said it's not him.
Yeah. And I had, I think his name is Joe Sharkey. I don't have the book next to me, but he wrote like the top book on the John List story.
Oh, really? Okay.
I had him on the show. He was a fantastic guest. And he's just like, there's no way. John List wasn't the type of guy that would have done something like that. He was sort of a super nerdy accountant-y guy and had no experience doing anything like that and had some sort of a leg or knee injury that would occasionally slow him down a little bit that he had before the jump. So there's zero evidence. And plus, John List admitted to murdering his entire family, but said he was not Cooper.
Right.
And if you're going to admit to the worst crime of all time, you might as well throw in one that is kind of cool. Right. But he didn't.
Right. Yeah, he had no reason not to try to claim credit.
Right. No, it's not like if you admit to being DB Cooper, we'll knock off one of those life sentences. That doesn't matter. He got like 7 or whatever he got.
No, he was a tyrant, but yeah, he was. So along those same lines, what do you think of Mel Wilson?
I think he's interesting, but there's not a lot of information there.
Yeah. There's not much to say on him, really. And for those who don't know, Melvin Wilson was a guy who went missing about 2 months before the hijacking out of Wisconsin, I believe. He was a con man who had just been indicted federally for counterfeiting $200,000. So that's so crazy.
Was it exactly 200,000 or was it 250?
It was exactly 200,000.
Exactly.
Yeah, he was last seen throwing a 55-gallon drum full of counterfeit money into the Mississippi River and driving off.
That's not suspicious at all.
No, not at all. And he disappears about 2 months earlier. He's a good match to the profile. They called it a winter tan. They used to say his skin was real dark complexion. But the problem with him is he was a Navy guy. He was in the surface Navy during World War II. No aviation experience. We do know now that he turned up in January 1972 in British Columbia, claiming to be a furloughed airline pilot of all things, and instantly got a 19-year-old female pregnant. And
did he attend any soccer games while he was in BC?
What's the reference?
Isn't one of the DB Cooper letters that they were attending some sort of a soccer cup in BC?
Oh, yeah. No. The cup, it wasn't a cup. It was a skydiving tournament, I think.
Gosh, for some reason I was remembering it as a soccer game.
I think it's a skydiving. And actually the FBI went there and showed Cooper's photograph to a lot of people. I forget what the exact place was. It was a skydiving tournament essentially that was in Canada, and it was in December of 71, I think, which would be really cold in Canada to be doing that. I would think in December 71, but I believe they did that. Yeah, no. If I still say that, if John List, it's funny, like if John List had never been found, I often joke that he'd be like the patron saint of no pool, right? If for people who believe that. And I mean, what, here's another question for you, Darren, is.
But even still, the FBI wouldn't have thought that. It just would have been us armchair dudes, because the FBI would have, talked to everyone else and known like, oh, this guy was never going to pull off some sort of skyjacking.
Yeah. And they went full stop. I mean, there's probably about 60 pages of John List 302s that I've seen. I need to put them on my website, but I don't like putting that guy on my website because he's such a creep. But John List, there's about 60 pages, and they did investigate. I mean, they got his full military records, things like that. It makes sense in a way that he would do this and then be so desperate to do something like this. And he was a smart guy, apparently, but just not good. What percentage would you say Cooper's survival was that night? You think personally?
100.
Me too. Yeah, I'm there too. I just don't know what kills him, right?
If he died, we would have found him instantly. Okay, there's some argument to a total no pull. You're right. Maybe theoretically we wouldn't have found anything by now, but I doubt it. But the odds that he at least pulls the ripcord are so staggeringly high.
Yeah.
That he survives that jump, because if he pulls the ripcord and dies, he's found that morning when the sun rises. He's found right away.
There's a giant billowing parachute behind him. Right.
So it's either he survives the jump or he's a no pull.
And pulled into like a crevice or something.
Right. And statistically, the odds of a no pull and not being found by this point in time is so small that, I would have I'd have to go to 7 decimal points before I could say 99.9999. He survives the jump.
Yeah.
There's no evidence that he died that night.
No,
but there's also no evidence that he survived, unfortunately.
But again, I never thought about it the way that you just said that. When you said that it was, you combine the probability of no pull, which is crazy low, and then the probability that he's not found is wild. And in fact, I've said it a bunch on here, but I talked to John Detler a good bit. I have John Detler on speed dial, I guess, but John Detler was there that night. He was one of there were only 3 NORJAC case agents from about 71 to 75, and that was Charlie Farrell, Don Steele, and John Detler. And John Detler was there on the sled test. All the photographs you see of the sled test, John Detler is the guy who took those. John Detler was there with the Army search. He was there when Barbara Ann Derry's body was found, the girl who was killed by Warren Forrest, the serial killer. And they found her body. He was there. But I asked John, I said, what do you really think about Cooper? Because I know what you guys always said to the media about Cooper, about him dying and all this type of stuff. He goes, well, we knew within a few days that he lived because nothing was found. And we were looking for vultures. A human body is going to cause vultures if you're looking for it. You're going to see that vultures. And the fact that nobody found a body in their backyard or crashed through their ceiling or hung up in a tree and then especially we've got this document. It's fascinating. Tom Manning was the agent in charge of all the ground searches. Tom Manning was the Longview agent. So Longview, of all places, it's a very small place, had an FBI office, and they had one guy who was there, worked there. I'm guessing a secretary worked there too, but there was one agent. And because that's closest to Longview, it was his jurisdiction. So all the ground searches were Tom Manning. We have this great document where Tom Manning finally in 1973, after the third ground search, just says quit. He writes a report to the FBI director, and it's fascinating. He says, look, there is no indication that this man was a no-pull, and we should stop spending money on searches. So that's as close as you'll get to the FBI saying that he lived. It's saying there's just no reason for us to think this anymore. Not that they thought it at the time. Now, Manning would go on to say that he thought Cooper landed in Lake Merwin, and he thought that the nylon of the shroud lines are not going to decay over time. He thought that Cooper sank to the bottom, and the paracord that he had wrapped around him essentially got caught up on something at the bottom and just never let his body go. That was his thought. And what's interesting is that Chris Cunningham spoke to Thomas Spangler, who's the guy who made the flight path map. And Spangler told Cunningham that his projections, because Spangler, his actual job Spangler's probably one of the best in the world at this. His job was to calculate parachute drops in Vietnam out of planes. That was literally what he did for his job all day, every day. So his calculations put Cooper in Lake Merwin. Now, again, all of that is bunk in a way because he was working with faulty information. For those who don't know, they believed that they were working off the assumption that Cooper jumped at 8:11 when the oscillations were reported. We know now that Cooper, from talking to Harold Anderson and from some things that Radchik has said, that the pressure bump that they all famously felt occurred a few minutes after the oscillations were reported. So Cooper's jumping minutes after 8:11. So all their calculations about Ariel, Merwin, all of that is based on when he was walking down the stairs, not when he actually jumped. So, and you're moving 3 miles a minute, you're a lot further south. But regardless, that's what Manning felt. And yeah, that's a good point. It's just, yeah, the probability is so low, right? And I looked it up, and I think no pulls. I did a deep dive into the last 20 years of skydiving accidents. In no pulls, it was like 7 out of 10 million jumps. And it was suicides, essentially. All of them, they think. So that is just, again, I think the guy wanted to live. I think he was prepared to die, but he clearly wanted to live. He had just robbed a bank. He was happy with having the money, right? He's not, this was not a suicide attempt, I don't think. You agree?
I don't think so. I truly believe he wanted to jump at night based on the flight he picked. And he knew where he was going to be. I mean, he doesn't know, hey, I'm going to land on the corner of 43rd and 7th.
Sure.
But he knows what he's getting himself in for. And I feel like that it gives, the Ted Braden so much credit because Ted Braden would want to jump at night into the woods and would be confident he could get away with that.
Right. Exactly.
And not many skydivers in 1971 would jump at night, and not many would jump in the woods. And the number that would jump at night into the woods, even like Matt Lamadou on my show was like, oh, I would never jump into the trees at night. You get killed doing that.
Mark Meltzer, who is obviously our patron saint for skydivers in the Vortex, Mark's like, hell no. I mean, when they do night jumps, it is rigorously coordinated and pre-planned because you could land in a power lines really easily, things and be killed. I mean, they have to be very, very, very careful when it comes to night jumps. Mark's like, there's no way I would just do a night jump into God knows what, right? That is somebody who is either very experienced in that and is not worried about it, or is someone like McNally who just the thought never even came into his head. What if I run into a power line or something? He just did it, right? And Drew makes a good point. Speaking of Braden, Drew just said, why ask for the notes back if it's a suicide? That's a good point.
Right.
Why would you hide your fingerprints like Cooper apparently did? Why would he be so cautious about being caught and things like that? Yeah. Because if I'm going to be caught, then I'll just kill myself. I don't care. if I'm suicidal, if I'm dying today anyway, who cares if I blow myself up or if I hit the ground at terminal velocity? Either way, yeah. So let's get into some of these questions that people have said. Okay, well, I'll ask these. These are some of mine. You've had some pretty far out theories be on your show, obviously. And feel free to throw somebody under the bus because it might generate some downloads for those episodes. What is the wildest thing you've heard on your show that you were just...
That DB Cooper lowered himself from the 727 with fishing wire or fishing line and then touched down on the mountains outside Reno.
Now, that was on your show?
Yeah.
Who was this?
Oh, gosh. It was... I don't remember her name.
Oh, was it Rat on Rat?
Liza?
Lisa something?
Liza, I think.
Liza, yeah. Was that it?
I think it was that one.
Yeah, it was. What was that?
There were two gals that I had on that.
Liza Morato, I think.
There was her, and then there was another lady who basically blamed her neighbor, but had no information to back it up.
I think that was Liza. I think Liza was the one who was talking about her neighbor. I think that's the one. The other female would have been who would that? What was that name? That was, looking through your podcast here. I believe that was maybe Harriet. Was that Harriet?
It was
Sucher?
It was Liza. You're right, because Harriet was her killer is the Zodiac.
Oh, that was a Zodiac thing.
Okay.
Why is there such a Zodiac stuff? Okay. So,
and in my show, there's no gotcha questions. I'm helping you tell your story to the best of your ability. And, hopefully I can help out here or there and you get your story out.
Right.
And so when she said that, my first thought, I just pictured exactly what she was describing.
Fishing line out of a jet.
And I'm like, okay, I'm not sure how that would work. Like, can you explain that a little bit more? And she was like, I explained it. He lowered himself from the plane using the fishing line and then touched down on the mountains outside Reno. And okay, even if the plane is only going 200 miles an hour.
Well, I mean, was she saying that he didn't even parachute?
Yes.
That he just
touched down.
Yeah, that's not how physics works at all. That's not the way. That is bizarre. People, and you're a saint, Darren. I can be a jerk. You're perfect for the Vortex, for being the neutral guy, because I would just laugh in somebody's face, or I'd have to be argumentative sometimes.
I don't think that's really what happened with Cooper. So it is a little ridiculous. But you got to have her on. I think that was the episode where I finished it and I was just like, ugh. And I sent it to Russell and I was like, this is insane. I don't know if we should even release this. And he was like, you know what? It's just what we do. Sometimes we do crazy. And I was like, okay, you're right.
Speaking of Russell, who is Russell? Tell us about Russell. We always hear about Russell. Who is that?
Russell is a guy I worked with at this terrible, terrible company. But the boss had a really good eye for talent. Mm-hmm. And he would use every ounce he could get out of you until you were so crazy that you left. And Russell had started working there. And then I worked for DirecTV, and then AT&T bought him out. And so I was looking for something else, and I landed at this company. And Russell and I worked together. We traveled together. We weren't necessarily friends, but we got along perfectly fine at work. We didn't hang out outside of work at all. But I mean, we traveled together. So there were times where we would spend 24 hours a day. We'd be side by side and then go stay in the same hotel room. And I knew that he had gone to college for video production and audio production. His dream was to be in the sports booth at ESPN. Mm-hmm. And here we are working for this terrible company in Boise, Idaho. And I left just before he did, but I also knew in that company that if you put in your 2 weeks, you're fired that second.
Oh, wow.
And so I wanted to do my 2 weeks. I really, really liked the people I worked with, but I hated the company.
Mm-hmm.
And so Russell was like kind of my supervisor there. He had a slightly different role than me. When we traveled, he would be in charge. And then, so I knew I was quitting that morning. I brought in donuts and I told him, hey, I'm quitting today because I can't put my 2 weeks in, but I'm going to do my whole shift. So me and Aaron, we're going to go to this job site and we'll get that knocked out and then we'll be back. And Russell was like, actually, you're going out with the boss today, who I hated. And I was like, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. And he's like, you have to, otherwise I'll have to. And then I'm like, well, it's my last day. I'm not going to. If you send me out with him, I'll quit. I'll just quit right now instead of at 3 p.m. And he was like, all right, fine, then go get your tools out of your truck. And so I was annoyed that he did that to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the last time I talked to Russell. And 3-4 months after that, I had started working on this project, the Cooper Vortex. And I couldn't put it together the way that I wanted. And if I could, it would have taken me so much time that I wouldn't do it. And I got to this point where Brian Woodruff posted on Facebook that there's a man that came around saying he was going to do a DB Cooper project and made all sorts of promises and they never came true. He's a liar and a scumbag. And I knew that Brian was talking about me. And I also knew that he was right, that I had gone out and done these interviews and now I'm just sitting on them. I am a scumbag and a liar. And so I was like, I have to figure out a way to at the very least get these 5 episodes done so that I didn't lie to these people.
Okay.
So I was like, well, who do I know that can help me? And I was like, oh yeah, Russell. Russell went to school to do this. I'll reach out to him. And so because our last interaction was not awesome, I reached out to him and I was like, hey, I want to meet you at it's Big Mike's in Cuna and I'll buy you a beer. And I just want to throw out an idea that I have. And he was like, okay, I'll meet you for a beer. And we met, we had a beer and I was like, hey, look, I'm trying to get the show together, blah, blah, blah. I need your help. I have nothing to offer you, but I could put your name on it too if you want. And after I explained who DB Cooper was, he was like, sure, I'm in. And he got him done right away. And he's awesome. He's working at school, an optometry school. I guarantee I got that wrong. It's going to be an orthopedic school or something, or whichever one I say it is, it's the other one. And he's just great. Absolutely great. I need to have him on the show. I've been trying to get him on the show. I've bullied him into it once before, but he'll be on the show.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I think that he's kind of like the man behind the scenes. He's kind of like your Jamie if you're Rogan. It's
absolutely
that's kind
absolutely.
And it's like if I listen to Rogan, I'm always like, why hasn't he ever just had Jamie on the show? I'd like to know who that guy is, right? So that's kind of how I am with that. So I want to transition. So, okay, one guy is talking about in the chat saying it was not that the battery, I keep referring to the battery the wrong way. It's not 9 volts and it's never called a D. You're right. It's basically a flashlight battery. It's a D cell, not a D cell, but
no, it's not a D cell.
Battery.
I only know it as a lantern cell.
Yeah, a dry cell battery is what they would call it. I mean, it is. I mean, that was the only batteries it was a very common battery at the time. I don't know the exact voltage. I think that one thing I'm looking at only says it had 1.5 volts on those 1970s dry cell batteries. So maybe I call them, but a D cell is a dry cell. That's why they call them Ds, right? I mean, I don't know, actually. I don't know anything about batteries, but I think I'm
picturing like the 6-volt lantern battery. It's a big square.
No, because it was round. Tina, I'll pull up an image here. No, Tina said it was the size. Tina said it was the thickness of her arm, the battery, and she said it was long, so it was cylindrical, and it was the thickness of her arm. This is what I'm thinking that they are. Let me pull this up right now. So these sort of things. This is what I'm pretty sure that she's describing.
Okay.
You know, these are from the 60s and 70s. So that looks about the thickness of somebody's arm, of a young lady's arm, you know, and it's about as long as the dynamite would have been. So she said it was about 6 inches long. So that's really what I'm considering whenever I think about what she had as a battery. So, okay, so I'll transition it into something. I don't believe you've talked about it on your pod, but you were very upset about your appearance in the TV show History's Mysteries and the way that all went down.
Yeah, I hated it. It was disgusting.
Right. But tell us about that.
There was a long build up to it. So I had already done the Netflix one, and that one that, you know, they reached out to me. Okay, this is awesome. I'm very interested in doing this. Then right before, they're like, okay, here's everything. Here's the travel. Here's what's going to happen. You're just going to sit down and we're going to interview you for 2 hours, and that's it. And then that's what happened. And I went home, and then it was on TV, and it is edited, certainly, but they didn't edit the way I answered anything. So they didn't make me seem like I answered a question that I wasn't really answering in real life. I had everything that was there was my answers, was my thoughts, was my opinion. It was great. It was fantastic. And then the History Channel one, there was so much lead up and build up. It was like, hey, will you do this? I'm like, yeah. And then like, hey, we want to do a phone interview with you first. And I was like, okay. So we do a phone interview. And then it's like, okay, now we're going to send you this list of questions. We're going to do one more phone interview. Be ready to talk about these questions. And it was super mundane stuff like, where was the plane? What day did this happen? Stuff that I already knew. When I saw those questions, I was like, I can speak to these any moment of any day. And then real close to it, like travel plans are already booked, real close. They said they're going to send me a guideline of how the conversation will go. And I'm like, okay, cool. That's fine. And they send it to me, and it's a script. It's questions and answers. I respond right away. I was like, hey, am I supposed to memorize this and give these answers? And she was like, oh, no. That's not what it is at all. It's a guideline of sort of how the conversation's going to go. And those are example answers. And it was all, you know, very rack strawy.
Yeah.
And I talked to either Dave or Drew about it, because we were all going to the same place at the same time. And they were like, oh yeah, I got the same answer, but this is what they said to me. And I was like, okay, that's probably what it's going to be. So on the day of the interview, I go into a nondescript building and walk back into a room full of green screens and cameras. And they sit me down, and I'm just sitting in this chair, and there's a bunch of people in front of me, 6 or 7 people, and all these cameras. And then they're like, okay, let's go. And it's just me sitting in a chair and someone behind a camera asking me these questions. And at first they asked me a question and I gave my answer. But then it started to very quickly get, that's a good answer, but could you say it this way? And then they like got on my pronunciation of certain things. And then it got to the point where it was, okay, now just say this. Now just say this. And then there's 6 or 7 people standing in front of me. You're doing great, Darren. You're doing a good job. Keep it up, Darren. This is awesome. And the whole time I'm just like so disgusted with myself. And the only thing I was looking forward to at that point in time was I knew I was taking an Uber from there to the Peterson Automotive Museum. So the whole time I was just sitting there thinking, God damn, I can't wait till this is over so I can go to the Peterson Museum.
Right.
Like, please let this be over so I can go to the Peterson
Oh,
Museum.
man, dude.
And
That's
then
so bad.
when it came out, my content in it is just like me staring blankly, kind of off camera, giving like the most flat, boring answer. Cause I was just
Well,
so angry.
the one that I'll tease you a little bit here. The one I'm even going to pull it up, Darren. The one that made me go, "Oh my God." And I was like, "Oh my God, look at his eyes. Is Darren blinking like SOS or something?" It was this. And I'll play it here.
In 1971, Walt would have been 37 years old. He looks similar to the hijacker. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's just
Walter Recca does not look similar to the hijacker.
no.
At
And that
all.
was a line I'm 100% fed.
Wow. Well, obviously. I mean, because no one would say that with a straight face. Like that's especially not you or me or Feudman or Drew. I mean, that's ridiculous. And so that was like, is he being held hostage? Like, this is basically you were in a way.
Yeah, I sold my soul for a flight to LA, 2 nights in a hotel, and 3 free Uber rides.
I think that I lucked out on that because I actually did talk to those people, and because they called me too. And I think because of you, I think you said that. I think they asked you who should they talk to? I think you mentioned me, and they called me, and I guess I was too abrasive because they gave me a list of names. Like they're like, talk about Jack Kofelt, talk about Recca, talk about Dick Briggs, and I was like,
Dick Briggs was one of the ones that they had asked. Yeah,
yeah.
That original list, I was so curious. Like, this is such a random grouping of names.
Yeah, but I believe it was obviously like Rackstraw, I think. Recca was there, William J. Smith, Gossett, no, not Gossett, Kofelt, Joe Lakich, I think, even.
Mm-hmm.
It was like.
And Dick Briggs, because I remember them asking about Dick Briggs, and I'm like, he's not really ever considered a suspect.
Right,
I don't know why he's in the mix with
and then,
all
of
these.
Course, I laid into Recca, and I guess I was too abrasive. They knew I was trouble, so they never called me back. So I don't know.
Right. They're like, well, we'll be able to bully this dumb hillbilly, but that lawyer from Mississippi, no.
Right. It was bad. It was so. All right. So I'm gonna do some quick questions here. So other people were wondering this too. And I'll just ask it without vacillating here. Tell me your Tina Barr theory. Just one. I know it's hard.
I don't even know if I have a Tina Barr theory. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. Yeah, I agree. It's almost like if anything made any sense, it would be the consensus among all of us.
Yeah.
Right. But nothing makes sense. So there isn't a consensus because nothing makes sense.
The only story that kind of makes sense, unfortunately, is Joe Weber's story with Dwayne, where that trail of events sort of makes sense.
Sure.
Do I believe it? No, not really. But
and the money might float. And we know that the money carried it. We know that money bundles don't float. But you know what? Maybe if they're in a bag that Dwayne Weber threw in the river, maybe they're going to float for a little while.
Right. Yeah.
So
blew some air in the bag and then tied it off and threw it.
Right. I just don't. I mean, I've got these. I mean, I have the crazy theory of like, I think Tom Kay kind of subscribes to it too, that the money at Tina Barr has nothing to do with D.B. Cooper. That he was never there. It's secondary. It's somebody else got a hold of it, perhaps, and for some reason threw it out their car and it wound up flooding, pushed it there. Not floating, but flooding will push things there, right? Flooding will push objects on the ground. And, I don't know. But so, yeah, Tina Barr, like I said, I didn't even want to, I'm still contemplating whether even publishing a Tina Barr chapter in my book because I hate it so much.
You have to.
I know. I decided the other day, I was like, I told Chris Cunningham, I said, I'm not doing it. I'm just not going to write a Tina Barr chapter. I'm not doing it. He's like, you have to. I said, no, I don't have to do anything. It's my book. And because honestly, Tina Barr doesn't tell us anything except that it's D.B. Cooper's money. That's why I don't even want to write a chapter. I didn't want to write a chapter because it's like, what's the point? I mean, it could be a paragraph. They found money here. It was D.B. Cooper's money, period. Because there's no other what else does it tell us other than confuse the hell out of us, right? It doesn't inform us at all about anything, I don't think. So, okay, so there's some rapid fire.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
You put the Tina Barr chapter in your book.
Yes.
Your book comes out tomorrow. Next week, we find out exactly what happened with DB Cooper and the Tina Barr money. Are you embarrassed that you omitted the Tina Barr chapter, or are you glad that you put it in?
Probably. I mean, I guess I'm glad that I put it in, because honestly, the way that I'm telling Tina Barr is just the facts. Like, my book is like, there's no theories in my book. It's just FBI files. And the problem with Tina Barr is that the FBI files are so highly redacted when it comes to Tina Barr. I don't know why, but they are out of control with their redactions. And I actually texted Larry McCarr. I was like, who the hell do you think is doing these redactions? Because they're out of control. Like, there are literally entire pages that are redacted. Just, I mean, like, surely there's a "the" or a "and" in these redactions, and you've redacted that too. Like, I mean, you can't. I mean, you're supposed to only redact trade secrets, family information that could identify somebody, or like FBI investigative techniques on a current case. These cases closed, right? So I'm like, who the hell is doing it? Like, I had the one that was most obnoxious. There was one recently where it was a woman who had been on a bus with a guy. Okay, some guy who looked like DB Cooper on the bus, right? And she gives a description, and it's got the description in the FBI file. And under age, it says approximately redaction years old. Like, this is somebody who doesn't even have a name. This is a person that somebody saw on a bus.
And likely dead now.
Yeah, well, why would you redact somebody's guess about somebody's age on a bus? So, like, the age box where it says like 25 years old or whatever is redacted. That is obnoxious. It's like this is a fictional character, essentially. It's somebody's vision. Somebody said, "Oh, I saw somebody who looked like this." That really infuriated me. And I'm trying to think some of the other ones. Oh yeah, they redacted Dan Cooper one time. Like, I saw in one of the files recently, in the most recent release, says something about, the guy who bought the ticket was known as Dan Cooper or DB Cooper, right? And they redacted Dan Cooper. And I'm like, do you not know what you're redacting, redactor? You know what I'm saying? Like, you would think the person would have some sense about the case who's doing the redactions to know what's important, but it's crazy. So here's some rapid fire questions for you. Victory for Cake asks, how do you think Cooper got to the airport in Portland?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I know. Don't be lazy like that, Darren.
I think he probably had an accomplice on some level.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was like a, hey, we're 50-50, we're partners, or if it was a, hey, Betty, I need you to drive me to the airport because I'm going on a business trip.
Right.
And she didn't know what he was doing.
That's a good one. The unknowing accomplice is a good idea. I like that.
Right. It doesn't have to be his wife. It could be
a colleague or
Phil from work. Hey,
right.
You mind dropping me off at the airport on your way home? Because I got something to do.
I guess that I would say that the issue with Cooper being from the area, I don't believe he was. And the reason I always say this is because the copycats, the ones who weren't completely insane, hijacked well away from where they were from. Okay, McNally was from Detroit, hijacked in St. Louis. McCoy's from Provo, Utah, hijacked in Denver. LaPointe was living in Denver and hijacked in Vegas. They hijacked in places where they weren't going to be recognized, right? I mean, I can go to the airport here in Jackson, Mississippi, and I might see somebody that I know, or I might see somebody who knows who I am at least, right? And that's dangerous, because if somebody remembers their neighbor, if you're somebody's neighbor and they knew at the barbecue last year on Veterans Day, you were talking about jumping out of a plane on D-Day to them, and then they see the story about the hijacking and they go, oh yeah, Dave was in the airport. I saw Dave at the airport. He didn't see me, but I saw him. So that's a danger.
There's a lot against the unknowing accomplice, because then you would hear that news story, you would see it and be like, You know what? I gave Tom a ride to the airport
Right.
yesterday. That's really weird.
Right. And so when you look at it, um, Mac did have an accomplice who drove him from Detroit to St. Louis. So he did have a real accomplice, and that guy went to prison. McCoy's wife drove him to the airport, and she was a knowing accomplice, clearly. She was supposed to pick him up that night, but she got spooked and drove home, and he just made his way home somehow. He figured it out, which, again, that's kind of my thing about Cooper. He just figured he was going to wing it. He figured it out. I mean, you get on the ground. If you have an accomplice, you tell the accomplice, hey, look, go sit by the phone. I will eventually get to a phone somehow. I will stash the money. I'll stash the parachute somewhere. I will figure out where I am and call you and say, come get me here. It's not that complicated, really. And, honestly, I mean, and again, you've said before, you grew up in Clark County. Now, Clark County wasn't as populated as it is now, but still, I looked it up. In the 1970 census had Clark County at 100,000 people. So it wasn't nothing. So if you landed in Clark County, you're going to say, okay, I know if you have a compass, especially, let's say you land at Hyson, right? I just need to walk west and eventually I'll get to I-5, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that complicated, really.
Right. And there's a good chance you're going to find a creek or a stream or a river, and that runs downhill. So just follow that.
Follow the direction. Yeah, right. Unless you're good.
All of the growth in Clark County is going to be in Vancouver.
Sure.
It's some of these smaller cities like Yakult and Amboy.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be surprised if they had a larger population in 70 than they do now. I mean, maybe there's some subdivisions, I guess, in Amboy,
right.
but those were working towns, and they're not cities, but there are towns with roads and railroad and a bar and a general store.
Sure.
And people in there. I hate this like lost in the wilderness idea. There isn't any of that. There's nowhere in that area where you would have to walk for more than an hour and not find something.
Right. Yeah. That's one thing that I pointed out in my latest video about when I rated all the Coopers, was kind of throwing some shade on Ralph Hemmelsbach's scenario where Cooper is wandering through the woods and crawls to a stream and drinks out of the stream and dies on the stream. It's like, it's ridiculous. I mean, he didn't jump into the Yukon. I mean, he jumped 10 miles from a major metropolitan city. And I think that is probably the biggest misconception about the entire Cooper case. If I had to put one misconception, it's that, he jumped into the wilderness, right? And that, gosh, he didn't have, even Larry Carr, when he got on the case, Larry's obviously changed his opinions on things. But, Larry Carr's very first press release about it from 2006, I guess, it's about how Cooper didn't have adequate supplies to camp out. He's like, camp out? What? I mean, this isn't bizarre. So it's insane. So, okay. So yeah, Cooper got to Portland. He could have flown in. I mean, obviously he could have done what McCoy did. McCoy took a plane from Salt Lake City to Denver and then hijacked that plane. Unfortunately for poor McCoy, it was the exact same plane and exact same flight crew that he had flown on. He didn't change airlines. He bought a ticket for American Airlines, and it was the same freaking crew. So he wasn't wearing gloves on that flight. So his fingerprints were already in the plane. So that's fascinating. It's like poor luck McCoy that he was like, oh no, it's the same people. So that the flight attendants remembered him from earlier.
I've seen a lot of discussion on, did Cooper fly in? Mm-hmm. And I think it was Flyjack who posted this a few years ago, but he had like all these different flight schedules and things that and sort of traced potential Cooper fly-in scenarios. And none of them really seemed to work, if my recollection is correct. He could have flown in, but I don't think he did. Yeah. I think he gets to the Portland airport. He gets a ride. He took a cab. I don't see Cooper taking a city bus. Right. And who knows what Portland's public transportation system was like in 71.
We had a woman on the Rose Ellis who is on the DB Cooper Facebook group, or was. Rose is a lifelong Portlander. I don't know how you say that. Portlandian, I guess. But
Yeah, let's go with the show.
Yeah, so she talked about the bus schedules and things like that, and they had pretty good public transport in the city at the time. So yeah, he could have ridden a bus or something like that. What's interesting is that with Heinemann, we see the FBI files where they interviewed all the taxi drivers. They interviewed lots of taxi drivers, lots of bus drivers,
Yep,
things like that, and none of them remembered him. But what's interesting is that they actually found a taxi driver who drove Heinemann to the airport. In his FBI files, they did find a guy who was like, "Oh yeah, I drove that guy to the airport," which is kind of neat. So, I don't know but again, you're a taxi driver, you probably drive a lot of people to the airport, and
right. And if I took 20 people to the airport, how many of them were men, and how many of them were men in a suit?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the problem. Honestly, it's amazing that Dennis Lenz even remembered anything about Cooper.
He might not have. See, that's the thing. If you're working at the front counter at KFC and you just took 207 orders during your shift, and then someone comes to you at the end of your shift and said, "Okay, around 5:00, do you remember the guy you served fried chicken to?" And if you get told a wild story, then maybe be like, "Oh yeah, I kind of do remember that guy now." So I don't put any faith in what he said, because it's just one customer after the next. And I'm positive that Cooper made sure not to leave a reason to be remembered.
Yeah.
Because he was doing that the entire time.
All right. Red Bingo asks, are serial numbers checked when bills are destroyed? So yeah, so actually we found out that they did not start recording serial numbers of destroyed bills until about 1990. And we also know that the average lifespan, I believe, the FBI actually contacted the Treasury Department in 1973. We have this document, and they asked them, said, what's the lifespan of a $20 bill? And shockingly, they wrote back, and I believe it was like 18 months at the time, because cash was so more ubiquitous. It was used a lot more back then than it is now, that cash didn't last as long. So the average lifespan, they said, was about 18 months. So that's crazy. But yeah, not till 1990 did they start recording serial numbers. So sure, theoretically, he could have spent the money and it never would have been recorded.
And they weren't recording all of the serial numbers.
Do what?
They're not recording all of them. They're just sampling some serial numbers. Sometimes it's truckloads of cash they're destroying.
Yeah, I don't know how they could record all of them. Yeah, I agree with you on that. I don't see that. So somebody else, let's see. Somebody mentions that the mystery bag. Yeah, I have in my book that I think a compass would have been an easy thing to put in your mystery bag. You put goggles, gloves in your mystery bag. I'd have had a canteen in there. I mean, he was obviously concerned about. He had to be thirsty. He had smoked 8 cigarettes after he had spilled his drink, right? And didn't have any refreshments. Obviously, we believe it's highly likely that he was concerned about being drugged. McNally, I asked Mac, it's one of the great questions of having a skyjacker, to have a parajacker like in your text messages every day, right, is so convenient, that I asked him, I said, did you drink anything on the plane? He said, no, I did not. And I said, why? He said, well, they could have drugged me. I didn't want to take that risk. So it's very, very reasonable that Cooper doesn't drink anything until after he becomes Cooper does not drink anything after he becomes the hijacker. You see,
right?
While he's still a passenger, he can take a drink from them, but when he becomes the hijacker, he, doesn't do that. So yeah, I think a compass, canteen would be a good thing to have in your mystery bag. His pistol for sure. Let's see. So audience questions. Brandon Arnold asks, who is the easiest guest to interview and who would be the most difficult guest to interview?
Bruce Smith is the easiest, because you just put a microphone in front of him and he doesn't need any help. He doesn't need any guidance or coaching, and he's on. Because I've hung out with Bruce outside of the show, and he's Bruce Smith, my friend. But once you put a microphone in front of him, he's Bruce Smith, the performer,
Sure.
and he's just so great, and he's fantastic.
So Bruce, you'd say Bruce. Okay. So now who would be the most difficult guest that you?
Some of the crazier people, of course, are difficult. The episode that I was most frustrated with my own performance would be Arthur Freeberg, the numismatist, because I'll write down sort of how I think the conversation's going to go. I'll have some questions ready. And once I got him on the air, he has this very matter-of-fact way of speaking, and would, I don't know if he was able to guess what my next question would be, but he was able to like knock out 3 questions in one short answer. So I felt wildly unprepared in the middle of the interview when I felt real prepared going into it. And it's a good episode. Russell did a great job on it, but I was real unhappy with my own performance on that one.
I could see that. And yeah, I've listened to that one a couple times, and it is kind of, it's a very matter-of-fact interview. It's not, there's nothing collegial about it. It's awkward in a way.
Yeah, and it's just his cadence didn't match what I had prepared or was ready for. I might not have been as good an interviewer at that point in time, so I wasn't ready to juke when he jived and whatnot.
Yeah. Steve Allen says here, Arthur was a real buzzkill. He says
he was a buzzkill for sure.
Captain No Fun, we call him. He was definitely,
and that's an episode where it's so funny because that guy knows more about U.S. currency than any of us do.
Sure.
Collectively, we all still know less about U.S. currency than he knows. And what I find so funny is how many people just shit all over what he had to say right away. And it's like, this guy, he was very honest and says he knows nothing about DB Cooper from the jump. But what he does know about is U.S. currency. Right. And these are his thoughts on U.S. currency. Right. And so it's just so interesting that, we want to believe a certain narrative, or of course he could have spent the money, or of course the money got spent, or of course it went into circulation, when he was like, the odds that you have $9,020 bills go into circulation and not a single one ever gets brought up in a flagged transaction. He's like, that math doesn't check out.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I actually believe that somebody told me this. And actually, no, I know it's true, actually, because it's in the FBI files, that the serial numbers are listed on the NCIC. That's the National Criminal Information Center database. So they're still there. So I don't know how that works. Again, I'm sure it works in ways that we mere citizens don't know, that maybe it would be, maybe even today, those serial numbers would get flagged, and it would be somewhere in the FBI files. Pete asks, did the F-106 pilots try to use the infrared search trackers on their jets? I don't know. I know they had those. There's not a lot of information about those pilots. I do know, I've read one interview with one of them, and I do believe they just said that they had trouble seeing the plane because.
And how well did those work when it was wet outside?
Yeah, I don't know.
In 1971.
Yeah, so the F-106s are interesting. So they're fighter intercept planes. They actually are flown by not the pilot. The pilots can fly them, obviously. They're pilots. But they are actually, their navigation is controlled by a computer somewhere else on a base. They're really interesting planes. They would basically, you could lock onto a target 500 miles away, right? And the interceptors would fly precisely to that target. So that's one of the other reasons why I think the whole narrative about, where Eric will say, the Air Force guys were tracking the fighter jets that night, not their. I'm like, no, clearly they weren't tracking the fighter jets that night because the Air Force guys had to have a target to send the fighters to, right? And it's duh. And we know those, and it's almost like this. It's like, well, we know that the fighter planes broke off right after Portland, yet mysteriously, Eric, the flight path continues all the way to Reno. tracked to Reno. So did they suddenly stop tracking the fighters and go, oh crap, we're tracking the wrong? It's ridiculous. And how funny is it that the flight path that the Air Force radar tracking perfectly mirrors a lumbering 727 chugging along at 160 miles an hour or whatever, right? It's just absurd. And I don't like, anyway. So let's see. More questions for Darren. Kelly Gesterling asks, out of all of the episodes, what episode was hardest to keep your mouth shut on?
None, honestly, because the one I did with Marty was pretty exciting, the recent one, but I only had to keep my mouth shut for a couple of days on that because Russell really got to work. But it's not a problem to keep my mouth shut because nobody in my daily life gives a shit about this at all. At all. I told my big news about Barb at work, and it wasn't like that leaked to the Facebook group right away.
Sure.
Because everyone at my work or in my house or my friend group, as soon as I talk about DB Cooper, they roll their eyes and look away.
I get that. So I think she may have also could have meant hardest to keep your mouth shut on, meaning where you wanted to like.
Oh yeah, chest. It would have to be. It'd have to be one of the crazies I had on the show. Dr. David Gold. That was another one where, Liza's suspect lowered himself out of a plane with fishing line onto the mountains, but David Gold's suspect killed 20 to 30,000 people. 20 to 30,000.
Who's this?
Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. After they escaped from Alcatraz, they went on a murderous rampage in the tens of thousands, Ryan. Tens of thousands.
Like, why? It's like, and do you not get the sense that these people are insane when you vet them? Because I know you always make a phone call to people first.
Not always. Not always. I've done a couple of episodes where the first contact I have with them is a few minutes over Zoom before I push the record button.
Okay.
And I like doing that. I really like doing that. And I love to punish myself. So I've sought out all the crazy people. Did any of them come to me? I don't know if any came to me. The Ed Edwards thing, that sort of got pushed on me. That's a funny story because that one, I've had requests for people on the show or to cover a suspect. I've gotten those emails. But if I've gotten 200 of those emails since I've been doing the show, 125 of them were for me to cover Ed Edwards, and that came in like a 3-month period.
That's bizarre.
It's way bizarre. And I talked to John Cameron. I have to look at my books to make sure I'm saying the right name. I talked to John Cameron about it, that this had happened. And he was like, oh, it's probably this one guy. And he told me who it was. And I looked in my email, but I didn't have an email from that name, but I just got bombarded with like DMs and emails from different people about why I hadn't covered Ed Edwards.
That's obviously a coordinated thing. Why was Ed Edwards ever in the news for a while?
He appeared on a game show and wrote a book about the fact that he was a reformed criminal and straightened his life up, but like committed a couple of murders after that.
Okay.
He adopted a kid and then made him work for him or do something weird like that. And then once he was 19, he was like, you know what? I'm just out of here now. I don't need any of this.
Ed Edwards is like a big block-headed Midwesterner. I mean, like blonde hair.
Oh yeah. Doesn't fit the description at all. Close. Couldn't have done it. Doesn't make sense. And Ed Edwards, he is the Zodiac killer. He killed John Benet Ramsey. He killed Teresa Hallback. The Atlanta child killings. Every single unsolved crime that happened while Ed Edwards was alive was committed by Ed Edwards.
So we're certain he didn't kill the 5 prostitutes in Whitechapel in 1889, right? I mean,
he killed the Black Dahlia.
He killed the Black Dahlia, cut her head off. Okay. Yes. Okay. That's what is it about trying to connect crimes?
I don't know. I don't know what it is. And especially like connecting Cooper to a murderer, I struggle with, because especially the Zodiac, because the Zodiac, it seemed like he killed for pleasure. That's what he wanted to do. That was the goal. He didn't, take their watch off after they were dead. He didn't go through their wallet. He didn't drive off with their car and part it out. It seemed like the goal was, I want to kill someone. And
Right.
with Cooper, it seemed like his goal for that crime anyways was to hurt no one and get money.
Sure.
Which is the exact opposite.
Yeah. It's like, Mac, when, if you listen to McNally talk about it, he said that when the first stewardess saw him crouching in the back with his submachine gun, first thing she said was, "Don't hurt anybody." And he said, "Ma'am, I'm only here for money. I'm not going to hurt anybody unless they mess with me. So don't mess with me, but I'm not going to." And it's interesting, we've asked McNally when we were there at CooperCon, would you have killed somebody that day? And he straight up said, "Yeah, I would have. Absolutely." So, Mac was ready to kill people. Mac was a true enough criminal at the time, for sure. And I made sure of that on CooperCon. When I was interviewing him, I made sure the audience knew that. I said, were you a felon already? He goes, "Yeah, I was already a felon." These skyjackers, unless they had mental problems, they kind of divide into different categories. That some of them are just so crazy that they're just brains aren't. They're mentally ill people who are very mentally ill. Then you have this element of true criminals like McNally, who were guys who would normally just rob a bank, but thought this was an easier way to do it. Then you've got the PTSD Vietnam guys who were like McCoy and LaPointe and Heady, who were just all messed up from Vietnam, who just they wanted an outlet somehow or something. I don't know what was going on with them, But so somebody asks us,
wait, one more thing.
Yes.
As far as connecting crimes to Cooper, I am not interested in the Zodiac link. I'm not interested in some other serial killer link. But here's what I am a sucker for. I'm a sucker for some sort of CIA, JFK, that sort of connection. Because I never used to believe any of this, but there's a great book about the Charles Manson case called Chaos. I want to say it's Tom O'Neill is the author of that book. It is fantastic. But the government was up to a lot of shenanigans in the late 60s, early 70s. A lot of weird shenanigans.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no doubt
And
about
stuff that would have been, you're crazy to think the government was dosing Johns with LSD. They would never do that. Well, actually, turns out they did.
MK Ultra was real.
The dosing Johns is part of Midnight Ultra. It's Midnight Climax, which is a great name for that.
Well, think Ted Kaczynski was legitimately a victim of MK Ultra, right?
Yes,
that's been proven.
Yes,
it's not even like a joke. There's a real link there.
That connection stuff, I'm an absolute sucker for.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's interesting. I actually just read something today that where Richard Nixon used to always say that whenever he would get, people would say, if you get Nixon, when Nixon during his elder statesman years after being president, because he was still around for about 20 years, they said if you got a few drinks in Richard Nixon, he would basically say that the same people who got Kennedy got him. He would say there were interests in the, and it had something to do with Cuba too. It was all this weird Cuba element to it, mafia type stuff that they got Nixon. They said he would say they just didn't have a bullet for me.
And it's not like there's zero evidence that the CIA was definitely not involved in JFK.
No, and that's something that's kind of, and we've kind of made that connection to. And I don't like the conspiracy stuff either, but if you look at the book about Skip Hall, John Limbach's book, and it's Limbach.
I'm about a quarter of the way through it. I wish that this weekend I was like, I'm going to have read that entire book before the interview with Ryan, and then yesterday I just couldn't get it done.
Obviously, Limbach's a guy you want to have on.
For sure.
No, it's a good book. It's well written, and this was a guy who, he's not quite like Braden. Braden legitimately was CIA. I mean, there's no, he was literally on the payroll as McAfee Sog, right? But Skip Hall had these connections to them through his anti-Castro stuff. Again, the book, it talks about Interpen, this gang of like soldiers of fortune who would go raid Cuba for fun, basically. And the CIA didn't support them, but they didn't stop them from doing it. So, and then the fact that one of the guys that Lauren Hall did all this stuff with ended up being one of the guys to break into Watergate. I mean, literally one of the same guys who Hall ran with was one of these guys that got caught in Watergate. Then we have Lauren Hall in.
Is there anyone else in the Watergate scandal that could potentially be a DB Cooper suspect?
I have a thought. Yes. The Howard Hunt thing. That's right. So yeah. I mean, it's weird.
And like what the work that Nikki's done researching Lyle Cameron.
Yeah,
there's a lot of weird stuff going on there.
And that's in Limbach's book actually. So like Limbach, Lauren Hall knew Jack Ruby. Like that's been verified by the government that they knew each other. Then you've got Lauren Hall being the last person that Jack Ruby called before he shot Oswald was literally Lyle Cameron. What? Like that is, and that's not like, if I say something, I'm not talking out of my ass. That's literally in an FBI file. It says that the last person Jack Ruby called was some guy named Lyle Cameron in Elsinore, California. It's like, okay, I know a Lyle Cameron who lived in Elsinore, California. And
he wasn't a bookie.
No, I don't know what he was. What's interesting about Lyle Cameron is that he was a snitch too. He hated drugs. He actually got ousted. He was president. He was like the president of the USPA, so the U.S. Parachute Association. And they, no confidence, voted him out the board because he kept snitching on basically the U.S. parachute team were a bunch of drug dealers or a bunch of druggies. And Lyle Cameron was having none of that. So he turned them into it's really interesting stuff there. So, okay. So, let's see. Bill Plunski asks, do you think the FBI is covering up anything?
Nothing important or of value. Certainly there's got to be some stuff that they're keeping a little closer to their chest, or maybe they have this, but they can't talk about it because these people are alive. But nothing that would be shocking or impressive. I think if they had anything like that, they would have pursued it themselves.
Yeah, and my response to that would be that having literally gone through 40,000 plus of these files and reading them, I don't know how many of us are doing that. It's me and Andrade and Flyjack, I guess. But going through there would have been things in there that would slip through the cracks. That would have. It's almost like I think about. And me and Flyjack got in a humongous argument on DZ as we do, that about basically, and I know why he did this, because Heinemann, his suspect, was described in the FBI by the stewardesses. They said he had nicotine stained fingers. Okay, so Heinemann clearly, I mean, the guy, part of his ransom was 2,000 Benson and Hedges cigarettes. So yes, this guy liked to smoke and probably had cigarette stains on his fingers.
They're hard to get in Honduras.
Yes, that's right. The Benson and Hedges. And so there is somewhere in the FBI files where in 1986, in a Cooper description, in one of the famous, in the descriptions of 5'10", 6 feet tall, one of the, boilerplate, it says cigarette stains on right hand. Okay. Well, that's one thing out of thousands of descriptions, right? And it's in the 80s, and it happens to be in the exact same file where they're talking about a suspect who had cigarette stains on his right hand. So it just seems like a typo or something like that to me.
Who cares about cigarette stains on his hand? He smoked 8 cigarettes in 5 hours. There's a good chance he was a regular smoker.
Well, but I would say though that the cigarette stains, though, that would be a notable physical characteristic that would have gone out to everybody searching for this guy, right? Every description of Cooper that was sent to any FBI office, to Dallas, because we have all the files. We have them sending descriptions to Dallas, to Columbus, Ohio, to all these offices, right? That would have been there if that had been there, because that's a very obvious thing that you can't get rid of. It's a stain. So let's see. Nicole Legg says, what do you think Darren is going to solve the case, and what are your thoughts on some of the recent activity in the case?
I don't know what's going to solve the case. I've thought about this a lot. The funny thing is, a confession. Well, we've had a lot of those. So any confession could Ryan, could you hear a confession that's good enough that you could be sold without any evidence?
No, because I have read enough to craft a very convincing story, right? And I think somebody else could do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that obviously some people, what's fascinating to me though, is look at like Rekha. I enjoy listening. I do, like, for all the crap I give Rekha, I do enjoy listening to his confession because his voice kind of sounds like you'd expect Cooper's voice to be. And some of the things
Is there another confession that we can listen to?
No, not that I'm aware of. So
Not that I'm aware of.
But he ruins it, of course, with saying I was going to jump out the side door, and the stewardess said to jump out the back. Or the Clay Alum stuff. But no, I think so. It's interesting. So Barb messes up her confession with Woodburn, Oregon, apparently, and Rekha messes his up. They always mess these things up. So no, no, there's no confession that would. What about you? Is there any confession?
It would have to be something, because it couldn't be any skyjacking details. It would have to be planning or post-jump details with a credible enough suspect that I could get enough buy-in where I would say, yes, I'm sold on this suspect. Right. Even though, they've been dead for 18 years. Obviously, there's not going to be a trial. We're not going to get a definitive, clearly it was this person, guilty, bang. But I think I could be convinced if I heard the right story. And I've heard a lot of confessions.
Well, Darren, here's what I would say. If one of these confessors had a Tina Barr explanation that actually makes sense, then I might go, okay, I'll listen, because there are none that make sense. So if you do have none that
make sense, I would bet money that if DB Cooper joined this chat right now, he isn't sure how the money got there.
I would think that too.
He's like, oh, that's obviously part of the money I lost, but right. How it got there, I have no idea.
The money I lost. And see, that's kind of where that's the hill I'm dying on lately. And it seems like you are too, that the guy lived, but he lost the money probably. Right.
I don't know if he lost all the money.
Maybe some of it, you think? At least some of it.
I think he lost some of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. People always say maybe that's the bundle that he offered to Tina. And instead of putting it back in the bag, he put it in his jacket or something, or, who knows?
Or, I walk out on my back porch to smoke my morning cigarette, November 24th, 1971, and I notice something in my backyard. And because I'm a shady, slippery guy, I walk over there and see a dead body. I'm not even aware of the DB Cooper story yet. But still, somehow my first move is, damn, this guy's got a bunch of money. I'm taking this money, and I'm just putting him 4 feet below the ground right here.
There are plenty of unscrupulous individuals out there.
But then he has that money. Then he learns the story.
Yeah. That the numbers
and
are
like, oh shit, this money's marked.
right.
Then he has it sitting around for a while, and maybe see that's where my story can't even make sense. There, it's
Yeah.
like, oh, maybe he decides to go
Just-
from
Yeah.
his house in Amboy and then drive to Tina Bar to
No, you
bury
just
it
burn
somewhere
it in
to
a
potentially be
backyard.
found.
You just
Yeah.
burn it in a 55-gallon drum in the backyard. Like you're
Yes.
burning leaves. You know, yeah. And it's funny. Jude Morrow actually asked you, have you thought more about the theory of Cooper surviving the jump, then getting murdered and dumped on the ground? he says accomplice turned Judas.
No, that would be pretty awesome though if they did this as a team,
Yeah.
and one guy is just sitting in a pickup truck eating Doritos while Cooper's doing this night jump.
Like the Joker.
Yes,
Dark Knight.
yes, exactly like that. That would be so awesome.
That would be the ultimate. What's funny
But
about
then that guy, the other guy in that scenario, his story is so much better than Cooper's
Yeah.
that there's no way he never told anyone that story.
Cooper was the pawn.
You know
That
that
would
DB
be-
Cooper guy? Yeah, that was totally real. And he got away with the money. And then I picked him up in my truck and I shot him and kicked him in the ditch.
The Joker. So yeah, there we go. The Joker was really Cooper. That's great.
That is great. That is great.
Alan Kelly asks, can someone share Donna Elliott's recipe for the chili at Ariel? I've always heard that chili was really good. I don't know if you ever had it.
It was beef stew, I believe.
Or maybe chili. Yeah, maybe I was thinking it was stew. You're right.
Because on DB Cooper days, wasn't it stew? It was like beef stew, and
It
they
was
gave you
stew.
buttered white bread with it.
So now, was she still alive when you were there, right?
Yeah, I've met Donna.
Yeah, she died in maybe 2015 or something like that. It wasn't.
Yeah.
Right. And they got rid of it. So I guess I know that Dan Greider got access to that store when he filmed Probable Cause because he goes inside there. So I guess Brian Elliott will let people in there, I suppose, if you ask nicely. I mean, because it's still there. The structure is still there, I think.
Brian Woodruff.
Brian Woodruff. I'm sorry, Elliott.
Yeah.
Brian Woodruff. All the stuff is in there for sure. That's still there.
One of my greatest memories in the DB Cooper world is it would have been CooperCon 2019, I believe. After that CooperCon, Ben Holland and I drove to the Ariel store at like 11 p.m.
Nice.
And then Brian opened it up for us. He lit a fire. We just hung out and drank and had a great time in there. And Brian showed us all of his memorabilia he's collected over the years.
What a great memory for you. Yeah.
Oh, it was
jealous.
so much fun. It was so much fun.
Yeah. So,
And
Uncle
Brian
Jim
liked to party, so it was a good time.
Uncle Jim says the floor is probably toast, though. I don't know what that means. Maybe the floor.
Yeah, the floor was always crooked, and the building was like on a hillside where it gets a lot of rain. It just the worst design ever, and there was no money to fix it up. So over the years, it just got Band-Aids put over wounds throughout its life instead of anything truly being fixed. So
probably had
like
one toilet, probably, I would think.
The last time I went, they had a men's room and a woman's room, and Brian told me it was like only the women's toilet works anymore.
Yeah, just
so there's just like a bathroom there that doesn't work even.
Just go in the woods and take a leak if you have to go to the bathroom. I would think that's probably what I did. Just take a few steps out there and go to the woods. Let's see. Somebody says, let's see. Jamie Beats, who you never interviewed on your show. He never wanted to come on, I guess. Beats would have been great.
Yeah, that jerk. Why doesn't he come on the show?
Jamie asked, did you get a Christmas card this year from Dan Greider?
I did not. I did not. I got one the previous year. The second I woke up to his Christmas card.
God, what an interesting character. Dan actually wants to do an interview with me, and I'm contemplating it. It would have to be on my terms, honestly. I'm not sure. I think
you should do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not scared of it. I mean, I know I can handle it. It's nothing that I'm worried about. I'm just worried about because I don't know about Greider. Sometimes he has to know better. Like there's no. He knows that parachute he found was not Cooper's parachute. He has to know this, and he still presented it as if it is. And that's a real problem for me. Let's see. Mark Alexander asks, how much stock do you put in Cooper saying he wasn't going to be taken alive? I mean,
A decent amount.
I would take him at his word. Yeah.
Likely he said that.
I mean, do you think he was willing to set the bomb off? Well, here's what I'll answer that. I guess I'll say that I don't think he would have. Well, he was never going to set it off in the air, right? There was never any reason for him to set it off in the air with the passengers on board because there's no danger to him from being attacked by FBI when he's in the air. So I would hope that if he ever set it off in the plane, it would have been only because the Tina and the pilots had escaped and he was trapped there.
As a last resort.
Yeah.
I think it's Tom K. It was like, if the bomb's not real, you're stuck in an aluminum jail cell.
Yeah. And also another thing a bomb does too, is it blows your body up too. So it, keeps you from being ID'd. And so I actually came across Australia's very first hijacking, maybe their only hijacking ever, actually to this date, occurred in 1972 during this wave of hijackings. The guy hijacked a plane, had a parachute, maybe a little bit of a copycat in a way, but he hijacked this plane and they shot him. He ended up getting in a gunfight with their cops, and they did not identify his body for about a year. They even put pictures of his body in the paper. They would open his eyes like you'd see pictures from the Wild West where they'd prop up the guy, right? And he looks like it's like this guy's dead, but he looks alive in this photograph. And they would say, "Do you know this man?" Turned out he was like a student from Tasmania, I believe. And they eventually ID'd him. He was like his parents had died or something. It was real kind of a tragic story. He was kind of mentally ill, but yeah. So that's something that Cooper probably wanted to avoid. Because in 1971, if they had shot this guy dead and he had no ID on him, he would have been like the Somerton Man, and they'd have just put pictures of his dead face on TV and said, "Hey, do you know this guy?" Their sensibilities weren't as, kind as we are now. So yeah, that blows your body up. So let's see.
8 sticks of dynamite in your lap, and there's not going to be many pieces of you to pick up.
Well, what's interesting is that we have the person who spoke to Alice Hancock, and Alice Hancock made a point about basically, maybe I'm telling the story wrong, but Harold Anderson basically told her and maybe Flo, look, if that bomb goes off, it's not like Hollywood. It's not just the plane is not going to explode into a fireball. It's dynamite. It's not, high explosive. I mean, it's going to blow out the side of the plane, but the plane is stable enough to keep flying. We may have to crash land.
I'd be curious. You blow up 8 sticks of dynamite in a plane.
I don't know. I mean, it just depends. I often think about the movie Airport. I don't know how accurate that is, but if you watch I tell everybody, if you're into Cooper, go on Netflix and watch the show. Watch the movie Airport.
Also watch North by Northwest.
Yes, another one. Yes, and when the dynamite goes off, it's a spoiler, but the bomb does go off in Airport, and it does decompress. It does cause problems, but they don't crash. But Harold Anderson basically was telling the flight attendants, if we crash land into Puget Sound, make sure your boots are off. Take your boots off because it'll tear up the slide, the little inflatable slide, and B, your boots will fill up with water and you'll drown. So take your boots off just the fact that he was even thinking about that in that scenario.
And that's weird. Not even good advice.
No, I would think it is. Take your boots off. If you're going in the water, water will fill your boots up, and you won't be able to swim as well.
You've never gotten into the water with your boots on?
Well, it should.
You ever been pushed into a pool by a friend?
I guess I have. Yeah, with boots on, I suppose it does fill up, but
you have wet boots. I mean, it's fine.
It may be so. Let's see. So,
if I'm leaving a plane crash, would I rather slide down that thing into the water with my boots on or barefoot? Give me my boots.
Yeah, I suppose. Somebody asked, let's see, where did it go? Nicole Legg again asks, if you could ask the flight crew anything, what would it be?
That's a good question because I don't think it would be anything because I am not investigating this case.
Right.
I am not trying to solve this personally. I am not the one who is going to chase the final lead and be the one waving the victory flag. I'm going to be the guy that asks that person to come on my show. So there's a reason I've had some opportunity to have, let's call them firsthand people on the show. And I've been hesitant about doing that because that's really not what my show is about. I would more ask them what their experience had been like being in this world rather than ask them to recount that 3.5 hour period. That's not what I'm interested in, because if you want that information from them, you should have gotten it in the few days afterward, because as soon as this became a media thing, recollections fade, memories are hazy, and they get worse as time goes on. And with how much this has been in the media and everything, I'm not interested in asking any questions that haven't been asked to the people that were involved in this. I would be interested in talking to them about what their experience has been like being involved in this as an unwilling participant.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess I'm with you on that. I guess as somebody who is investigating it, I guess I would have a couple questions. That's not much though.
Right, you would, because you're investigating this and you want to talk to him from that angle. But I want to know if I could interview Tina, and I'll never ask if she would like to be on the show. She could find me.
Yeah, if you're watching, Tina.
But I don't know if I would ask many questions, if any at all, about the hijacking.
Mm-hmm.
I would probably want to start my interview with, okay, Thanksgiving, you wake up. That's where I would start my interview, because that's what I want to know from Tina, because that's what I'm curious about. I'm interested in DB Cooper. I'm very interested in that. I would like to see the case solved. I want to know who Cooper was more than anything else in this world. Mm-hmm. I want to know exactly what happened. I've put so much thought into this, but I don't think there's anything that I could ask any of the people that were on that plane that hasn't been asked of them that would lead me to who DB Cooper was. That was a long answer.
No, but it's good. Yeah, for my part, if anybody's curious, I guess if I could ask them something, I would. It would be just, I would like to know from Tina how he actually had the money tied to himself, because there has been some, discussion about that, about how exactly the money was tied to him, and that might be illustrative if we know, for example, that he had a drag bag or something. That might be illustrative of the fact that maybe he lost the money. And what's interesting is that we actually have this document, but
you want that answer.
Yes.
November 26, 1971. You don't want the answer from today.
Well, what's interesting is that we actually have this document. I'll pull it up here. It's one of the 302s. They say here, this is a 302 here. I pulled on the screen. It says, this is somebody asking Tina Mucklow. They're saying, this is in 1972. This is one of the FBI guys. He's saying, we should ask her some more questions, like, how did the hijacker secure the money? Did he appear to be going to jump while holding the money packaged by a handle, or did he have a knapsack arrangement? What did the hijacker have around his waist? Did the hijacker express a fear to the stewardess that he'd be pulled out the door prematurely? So they wanted to ask some of these questions too of Tina. That kind of, I'm wondering too. But I guess that the only question I would really ask, like Radacek, is I've always just wondered, you overheard Cooper talking. You heard his voice. Did you get the sense, and maybe he's forgotten, probably has forgotten, but did you get the sense that he was a contemporary of yours, intelligence-wise? Or did you think he was on a lower socioeconomic level? You see what I'm saying?
Okay, that's an interesting question.
Right.
That's an interesting question.
Did you think he was a mechanic? No offense to mechanics, but as opposed to like a commercial airline pilot. Did you think he was blue collar, or was he more of a white collar guy like yourself? Now what's interesting is, now Tina may give us that answer. Tina says he seemed like an executive. She even uses the term executive. And for all the people, I think people have misunderstood the comment that people say when they said he was, what's the term that they used for him being uglyish? They use the term, I'm brain farting on it right now, homely. Yes, they use the word homely to describe Cooper. But that's really his features, because Hal Williams says that Cooper was smartly dressed. He called him smartly dressed. So he wasn't dressed frumpily, like a frump or anything. He was smartly dressed. That has been warped into, because Bill Mitchell mentioned that his socks didn't seem to match his shoes. Something.
Right, but Bill was a young guy, so he would look at it from a style angle. You know, if Cooper planned this as much as we think, then he wants to dress nice enough not to be noticed for being dressed poorly, but not dress so nice as to be noticed for dressing nice. He's so average and so unremarkable in every way.
Yeah.
And I have to think on some level that's planned. I mean, sure, you can't make yourself the most average looking if you have big ears or a big chin or a big nose or a goofy haircut.
Yeah.
Then that's going to be the first thing that gets called out. If someone saw me from across the bar, they'd be like, that guy had this weird goofy haircut. And that's the first thing they would say. So if you have giant ears, he's got giant ears.
Yeah.
But there isn't any one feature that stands out about him. Not anything.
No.
Because if there was, it would at least eliminate a bunch of suspects, because we could say everyone called out that he had buck teeth.
Sure.
Everyone called that out.
He's got one feature. He has the protruding lower lip. He has one. Tina
But
mentions
that's
that.
so mild still. If you're looking at someone from across the bar, that might not be, it might be something you mentioned, like, oh yeah, that guy that was sitting there, he did have a little bit of an underbite or protruding lower lip.
Here's where I kick back on that. We actually have a document from 1973 where Tina's still being shown photographs of suspects. And there's a document where she sees a guy and she goes, he doesn't look like Cooper, but his lower lip looks just like Cooper. So it was distinctive enough for her to remember 2 years later, looking at a photograph of a suspect, that the lower lip looks similar, right? So, and then again, we have Tina and Alice, independent of each other in interviews, using the term pouty to describe his lip. So I really think there was something going on there that was unusual, because that's really all of them say the thing. I mean, Flo, Alice, and Tina all mention his lip. And if you look at the Dracula sketch, I talk about this. We have got the Dracula sketch. I call it the Dracula sketch. We've got Florence Schaffner drawing this guy, or in 1988, and look at his lip there. Even so, 17 years later, she remembers this kind of offset lip that's offset from his mouth. That's not, you see what I'm saying? So like all these years later, that's what she remembers. So
I hate that sketch. I
know.
One.
It's like, what's funny is it looks just like the Kevin Spacey Kaiser Sose sketch from in Usual Suspects at the very end when the fax comes in. It's identical.
Yes, it does.
It's identical to that. I mean, I wish I could even pull that up, but Nikki wanted me to post this. It's you and him there.
Hell yeah.
What was that about? Tell us about that.
We went to visit Brian earlier in that day, because Nikki was like, hey, will you take me to the aerial store? And Nikki and I went. Brian, again, very graciously and generously, rest in peace, Brian, brought out a bunch of DB Cooper stuff for us to look through and look at. He just loved doing that for people and was an awesome guy. One thing that's hilarious about this picture is I remember it was unusually warm. So it was like 50 degrees and Nikki was freezing his ass off. I was in shorts and a t-shirt.
Small guy. He's a small guy for sure.
I'm the exact same size as him. It's just that he grew up in San Diego and I grew up in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we often talk about that, about the weather, right? That night, it's like it's 44 degrees on the ground. He wasn't freezing to death.
No, not at all. I mean, can you get hypothermia from long exposure and 40-degree weather? Sure. but he had clothes. He's not sleeping out alone in the wilderness. If I was in that area, just drop me in a random spot, completely random, I would be more afraid of being found sleeping than I would be scared of I got to get out of here. Like someone's going to notice I'm just sleeping out here.
Yeah. So yeah, that's always been the funny thing about that is Himmelsbach talks about how Cooper may have frozen to death before he hit the ground. It's like Ralph. That's the one thing I do laugh about with Dan Greider. I do think it's pretty funny when he does the whole Ralph. If you watch the Probable Cause, he's always going Ralph. What are you doing?
And that Probable Cause doc is good.
It is good. That's the
if you're a fan of DB Cooper, watch that. I think Dan did a great job on that. He put it together. Do I agree with the conclusions of it? No. Would I recommend that you watch it? Yes, it's good.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of where I'm at. It's like I can see why people believe that, because he's very convincing. He's a very convincing documentarian, I guess, right? I mean, he's good at what he does, but he is now, I guess the other person here in the Vortex that you've had your experiences with is obviously Blevins, right? Now, I believe maybe last year you were contemplating having Blevins on.
Last year, the year before,
maybe it's 2022.
Yesterday, maybe. The day before that.
Always.
I am always contemplating having Blevins on the show. He keeps teasing this book, Cooperland. I don't know if it got released as a PDF or something. I need to check back up on that. But
no,
I like Robert. Robert was my introduction into the Vortex. And I thought, it's Kenny Christensen. Kenny Christensen is obviously DB Cooper. I've read Skyjack and Into the Blast, and it's clearly Kenny Christensen.
Yep.
And so I could be done with this. But once I read those books and got on the Drop Zone, it turns out that Blevins and Kenny Christensen weren't the most popular people among.
Boy, they were savaging. Those guys like Bruce and Georgia and them just obliterated Sluggo, as nice as he was, just obliterated Kenny. Jamie Beats was always up against Blevins in those.
Oh, yeah. I remember I had read Into the Blast. I read the book. And then I think during that, I sort of peeked on the Drop Zone and read the most recent stuff, and that was it. But once I read Into the Blast, I was like, well, I need to go back a little bit and see on the Drop Zone, because that's where all the action's happening. This is the live stuff. And I can't remember who posted it. I want to say it was Georgia, had posted some crazy financial breakdown of Kenny Christensen's history with we got this receipt from a mortgage application and we got this tax form return, all this crazy stuff. And it was like, oh, they accounted for all of this money that in Blevins' book, he presents as sort of evidence that some of this money was Cooper's. And they just laid out his entire life. Like, he amassed this much wealth. He bought this piece of land. He sold that piece of land. He lived humbly. And it was just like, he's not Cooper.
No.
With that on top of all the other stuff I saw. And then that's when, I saw that they were talking about, oh, Bruce's book is, the second version of Bruce's book is about to be out. It's about to be out. And as soon as that came out, I got it right away. It was the timing on when that book came out and when I had finished Into the Blast. It was truly serendipity.
Right. Yeah. So Tom Voigt's actually in our chat. Tom says that Blevins is another Zodiac crossover to Cooper. I didn't know that.
It wouldn't surprise me if Blevins is looking for other groups. That's the thing. I love the guy, but he's just relentless. And I have no joke received hundreds of emails from Robert Blevins, usually between 2 and 5 o'clock in the middle of the night. And they're all beautifully worded 10 paragraphs long. Blevins is a fantastic writer.
He is
I
good.
really think he's a good writer.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're sending an email at 3:00 in the morning to someone, it doesn't need to be 12 paragraphs long.
Oh,
And
no.
you just, I want to help him. I want to support him. I want him to be in the group. But every single effort that myself or anyone else has made, he makes them regret it. He
Yeah.
makes them regret it.
Yeah. It's like you reach out. Yeah. You extend a hand to somebody and then they bite you. It's like, dude, I'm trying to be
Yes.
like civil. I don't get it.
And I've tried to get him on the show. If that book Cooperland comes out, there aren't a lot of books that I would wait in line overnight
Oh,
to
yeah.
get. But boy, that book, I would wait in line to get
Love
it.
to read
Blevins,
it.
if you want to send me an advance copy, name your price. I'll pay it. But I got to read that book, and I want him on the show. And he's agreed to be on the show a second time. First of all, he threatened to sue me if I didn't take the first episode down, which I did not do.
Heck no.
And then he agreed to come on another time. And I was like, okay, let's do it. Thursday at 7 p.m. I'll see you there. And then, last minute, he's like, okay, here are the new rules for the interview. These are the questions you're allowed to ask me. No other questions. And I was like, Robert, I'm not doing that. Like, that's ridiculous.
You don't give me a list of questions. It's ridiculous.
No.
That's ridiculous.
And so then he's like, okay, well, fine, I'm not doing that. And then, another interview he agrees to do. And I jumped through those hoops. And then he's like, okay, well, now I need this one more thing. And I'm like, okay, you're crossing the line.
It's like, yeah, he's difficult. It's like, why do you have to be so difficult?
Difficult's not the right word. It's
aggressively
something
difficult.
well beyond that.
Yeah, I understand. Oh, here's I pulled this up, folks. Tell me if this is not the same damn sketch here. I mean,
yes.
I mean, that's Kaiser Sose from Usual Suspects, and there's the Dracula sketch from 1988. That is the exact same sketch. Like, I don't even know. It's almost like, I mean, I know that the eyes look different, but it's like that's damn near the same. Even the lip is kind of weird. He's not wearing a suit, but I don't know where Flo got the widow's peak from. I mean, Cooper has a little bit of a widow's peak, but not like that. So let's see. Tom Voigt again is asking us if we have paid attention to the suicide of the Boeing whistleblower. I saw the headline. I didn't read about it though. Did you?
I looked at it on Twitter, and boy, is that interesting.
Yeah, he's suicide. Like, what was it? Vince Foster with the Clintons, shot twice in the head. It's like
the idea that I would travel to do a deposition and then before my deposition kill myself.
That sounds like something you'd see in Putin's Russia.
Yeah.
That's
or
really
on Goodfellas Part 2.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like. It sounds like that's what that is. So let me see. Another question. Let's see. Where do you think? Okay, Pat Boland asks, do you think Cooper was a pilot?
Probably.
Yeah.
I think he has some sort of aviation experience. He knew more about that plane than the pilots. He knew more about that plane than the pilots did.
Yeah.
Did he? Which is also interesting. So I use this example. If you have a guy in a pit crew for a racing team,
Mm-hmm.
he knows everything about that car, everything about it, but he doesn't know how to drive it. He has an idea on how to drive it.
True.
But that guy has never been behind the wheel of an F1 car in a race. Never.
Right.
And he never will be.
Right.
The driver of that car might not know anything about the car mechanically. He could tell you that the left side feels a little bit too soft and that at this speed going around this corner, he wants more dampening in the rear end. But he might not even be able to tell you how many cylinders that car has.
Right.
So you have these weird knowledge subsets where you are going to have pilots that can fly a plane that won't be able to tell you how it works. You have people that know everything about that plane, but are unable to fly it.
Right. I mean,
And I
it's
could
like,
see Cooper coming from either of those. And there are obviously there are people that built their own race car. So I'm not saying, oh, every race car driver doesn't know anything about engines or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. But you get into certain subsets of knowledge where you might know everything about something except how to do it, or you might know how to do something except for how it works.
right. Well, yeah. I mean, here's something. I'll pull this up too in the chat or in the video here. This is something that Nikki pointed out to me the other day. This is from an article or a thing about the airdrops in Thailand out of the 727s. And here it says, you can see here, I'll read it for people on the podcast. This guy is writing, he says, the cargo drops went without a hitch. Then we suited up for our parachute jump. We leveled at 1,200 feet. The cabin was depressurized. Flaps were set at about 15 degrees. The landing gear was lowered to create drag to maintain 150 knots. And the exit ramp was lowered. Now, that's literally the exact same flight configurations. Literally.
Yes, it is. Except for in the Pacific Northwest, if you flew at 1,200 feet, it could be a real rough day.
Yeah, so a little lower. But that's the exact same flight configurations.
Yes, it is.
It's almost hard to picture that Cooper would just happenstance invent the same exact flight config that they did in Southeast Asia. I would be shocked if Cooper maybe wasn't a first person there, but he's definitely got secondhand information at the worst. That's so on the nose that it's almost hard to believe.
Right. And if you were one of those first few guys in that program, I can imagine a scenario where you're doing a classroom training. I'm never going to fly the plane. I'm never going to work on this plane, but I am going to jump out of it and I'm going to be the first few guys to do it. So we're doing this classroom training and they list like in this plane, this is the best configuration for jumping.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's something they learned like, hey, turns out when we were flying at 200 knots, that's a little too fast. So we need to go a little bit slower for this.
Yeah.
So it could have been something that they learned so that those guys knew the plane's configuration, but none of those guys would have known how to fly a plane.
Well, we talk about the cargo kickers. Like in this video here, you see these guys shoving cargo out the 727 in this video right there. These are kickers, right? Those guys, they, would have, they're wearing, if you look at it again, they're wearing headsets and they're listening to the pilots talk. So they know that these flaps, and actually in the video right there, those flaps look to be 15 degrees flaps. It's probably well, obviously it was because we know now that they were, and there go the jumpers out the back of them. And so fascinating stuff to see that, so
they're doing a static line on that though, aren't they?
They were. Yeah. That's the difference is a static line. Nikki asks to ask you about, ask Darren who wrote ha ha ha, and if there's any DB and Finn connection.
I am ultra confident that Rod Addix wrote ha 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 by DB Cooper.
Is that that's the guy from prison? Is that right?
Yes. I'm super confident in that. There have been a handful of Forrest Fenn people that for some reason won't let that go. I don't know if it's because it doesn't square with their narrative or if they're not satisfied with all of the evidence that I presented.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get it. I don't get that one. Show me any evidence that it's not what I said it is.
I mean, see, again, this is over my head a little bit. And I'm going to be on tomorrow night, actually going to be on a bit of a Finnish type show. Are they saying that Ha 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 was written by Forrest Fenn?
Well, I think a couple of things have changed and I'm dealing with different people there was one gal who's really awesome. I met her in person once and
is that Stephanie?
No.
Okay.
They thought it was potential, but they're not the ones that bothered me. I sought them out because of their Forrest Fenn DB Cooper book.
Yeah.
But then I don't know why Ha 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 became a thing. I think that book became a thing because of a perceived rarity in that book. And I can tell you for a fact that I have personally seen a box full of those books,
Mhm.
and I've also seen a photograph of what was probably a or two boxes full of those books. The book's not rare. The book's not valuable. Just
Yeah, I've got it
I,
I got it for $20 online.
I don't I don't get it. There is zero connection to Forrest Fenn. It was written by Rod Addix. I spoke with Stan Turrell. Stan Turrell. Stan Terrell. I spoke with him personally. He's been confident that that book was written by Rod Addix since it was released. The police who he spoke with were also aware that he had authored that book. There's just there isn't any mystery to that book,
Right.
and there's nothing cool about it. You want a cool rare Cooper book? There are a lot of them.
Oh
There
yeah,
are a lot of them. You get yourself a copy of Tusaw's book. Get
Midnight Blue.
Himmelsbach's book. Get DB Cooper, What Really Happened. And that book isn't very expensive right now either. You can pick it up for like $30.
Yeah.
But
I mean, there was a Tusaw on eBay last week for $10.
great deal.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic book and 100% worth reading. Is there a single person in the Vortex? Well, Brian Woodruff weirdly attached some value to Ha Ha Ha. But I don't know anyone else that puts any value into that book.
Oh,
It doesn't make
not even
sense. It's
no.
not interesting. It's not even a good story.
It's not even is it really about Cooper? I mean, only a couple chapters really are about. I mean, to me, I read it and I was like, it's a couple of chapters are about Cooper, I suppose. But
And I think Brian's angle on it was he thought the prize from the book was still out there.
well, and
And I
that would
don't
be alluring to Finn people, I suppose, because of the money chase and things like that, right? So I guess the whole treasure hunt. But I don't know. I mean, I'm talking out of my butt about the Finn stuff. Somebody asked you earlier, do you think that Cooper could have been Forrest Finn?
No. No, there's no evidence. He didn't look like him. It doesn't make sense. And then somebody else floated, well, maybe it was Forrest Fenn's brother.
Well, I mean, maybe it was Bobby Kennedy's brother too.
Let me make myself wildly unpopular with the Forrest Fenn crowd again. I think he was a con artist. I don't think the Forrest Fenn treasure hunt was real. And I don't believe any of that. Forrest Fenn was a con man.
Oh.
Period.
So you wait, whoa, okay, we're getting into this. Hang on, I'm so like again. I know nothing. I know more about the Russian monarchy in the 1700s, literally, and I literally do, than about the Forrest Fenn stuff. You're saying that the treasure hunt was fake?
I think the treasure hunt was fake, and I know I've done at least 17 minutes of research on this, and I think that the whole treasure hunt was fake. I think he enjoyed the attention that he got, and then he sort of became this guy that people wanted to pay attention to, that had some power. I think he did really sick, twisted stuff with that. And I think the fact that this treasure was found very mysteriously right before Forrest Fenn passed away was a long con. And if the treasure was real, I think there's some sort of involvement between him and Forrest Fenn, which could probably be proven.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe any of it. I think it was a huge con by one very gross, disturbed old man.
Sounds like the guy in Contact. If you've seen the movie Contact, right? It's a hoax. The whole thing is a hoax.
Why don't you just Google Forrest Fenn's behavior with women? Just
Okay.
Google that.
It's interesting. I don't know any of this stuff. I mean, Alan Kelly, of course, says here, con artist. He's perfect for DB Cooper. Well, I mean, I guess that's my holdup about Finn. The limited.
Yeah. Is Cooper a con artist? Could he be a womanizer? Is he a scumbag? Sure. But he's not Forrest Fenn.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess I would just say it seems like, but see, what's interesting is you're making me think maybe he could have been DB Cooper, because my hang up on Forrest Fenn was I didn't think he was a bad guy. It's my understanding. I didn't think he was a criminal. And he was a pilot. He was an upstanding pilot for so long, right? That I figured that he was not a good guy. But you're saying you think he was a bad guy.
I don't think he was a good guy. I mean, there are people that do good in their lives that can personally be bad people. I think Karl Malone was a fantastic basketball player. Do I think he's a good guy? Probably not. Probably not. Is he good at basketball? You're goddamn right he was.
Right. Well, OJ could run a football very well.
Yes, OJ. Great football player. OJ was amazing.
Just as bad of a human as he was a good football player.
Yes.
That's funny. Yeah, so let's see. What else? Okay. Okay. So your show, do you think that you're going to keep doing episodes of your show? Because in 2022, you said you were quitting your show.
Oh, I've said that like 5 or 6 times. But you can't leave the vortex.
No, you really can't.
I can quit doing a podcast, but I can't leave the vortex. And if I'm in the vortex, I might as well record my conversations instead of just having them.
Well, it's like the only person who's actually seemingly left the vortex, well, there's 2, I guess. It's Sluggo, who died recently, actually. And I guess Galen Cook, maybe. But Bruce says he still talks to Galen, right?
I wouldn't be surprised if Galen made a return.
So somebody asked you a while back
but I've got an episode that should be coming out in the next few days, and then I've got a bomb expert that I'm recording with on Sunday.
God, yes,
that is going to be so awesome.
That's the one I'm so looking forward to. I'm so looking forward to talking to somebody who actually dealt with IEDs and things in the
70s.
Yeah. That's, gosh. Yeah, I sent you the other day, you asked me for the bomb descriptions. I sent you all that stuff. So I think that might be enough. You know, the thing that really makes me scratch my head about the bomb is so Tina's father was an electrician. So she understood bombs, or she understood electrical things, right? So Tina, it was observant enough to, in her description, say how the end of one of the wires was stripped. Like, my daughter, I guarantee you, she's almost 16, that when she's 21 years old, I guarantee you she would not be observant enough to say that the end of the wire that the hijacker was holding was stripped, right? That is a unnecessary detail if it's a fake bomb, all right? That Cooper exposed that Cooper cut the rubber off the wire to expose the actual wire itself that could be plugged into the detonator. I mean, that is, gosh, man, that bomb might have been real. It's like,
it might have been real.
I think that's where we're getting there, you know? Yeah. So let's see. So I know what it was. Somebody asked you, if it's one of your podcasts a couple years ago, I think it was the one where you were being interviewed. They said, if you had a gun to your head, if a named suspect, who would it be? If you had a gun to your head? I think our answers are probably going to be the same.
It'd probably be Gossett.
Oh, Gossett.
Or Braden.
I'd say Braden, even though I just think he's too small. I like you said, you said back then, I would say Braden, and then I would pray really hard. You know? Yeah. That's kind of where I am too.
That's what I would do. Either one of those guys. The problem with that is I'm not sure about it. So it'd be the same as rolling a dice, putting a gun to my head and saying, roll a 5. Okay. I'm going to roll this dice. Yeah. I hope that it lands on 5.
Gosh, Gossett. Yeah. Just Gossett doesn't look like, one other thing somebody pointed out about Gossett is that his voice is high. His voice is like mine. It's a tenor. He had a tenor of a voice. We have audio of Gossett talking. Cooper had a low voice. It was deep and smooth.
Well, I mean, both of my suspects I picked, Braden and Gossett, they're not great matches for the physical description.
No, but I mean, as I've said 1,000 million times, if you could invent DB Cooper, it would look like Ted Braden as far as his personality goes and his experience, right? If you could fictionalize DB Cooper, and it's almost like I like that in apparently the movie, Not If You Understand, terrible title, I hate it, but because it's not in any FBI, it's not in any, he never said that, but Not If You, I mean, like, I think a better title for Not If You Understand would be Miss, I Have a Bomb. That'd be a cool title. Miss, I Have a Bomb. So, although I don't know if you can put bomb in the title of a movie, maybe you can't. I don't know, but yeah.
Or you better have a look at that note.
Yeah, look at the note, or yeah, right. Well, I would. So the I forgot what I was going to say about the daggum. How do we know that he didn't say Not If You Understand? I don't know, but anyway, I was saying so Not If You Understand. The producers only followed one DB Cooper related thing on their Instas and all this other stuff, and it was Drew Beeson. And I found that to be interesting that the writers and all of them followed Drew Beeson, and it makes me think, yeah, if you're going to make a DB Cooper action drama piece, Ted Braden would be a great template for Cooper. This CIA guy has very calm and cool, but has moments where he can snap out and scream at people. Braden was very like that. He was up and down like that. His personality. I mean, Milton Vordal would not be a very intriguing villain for a movie. Kenny Christensen would not be either. But Ted Braden was dangerous. Like, of all the Cooper suspects, who's a legitimate suspect, he's the one I would least want to meet in a dark alley, would be Ted Braden. This man actually killed people, and not like in a, maybe Cooper is a Zodiac. No, Ted Braden killed people. So now he's doing it. And did it out of work. I mean, he did murder a South Vietnamese officer, not in combat. So he was capable of it.
Who knows what he did working as a mercenary?
Oh, God. No. Yeah, in Africa, of all places, where nobody is going to chase him down. I mean, nobody's looking over your shoulder in Africa. You're in the middle of nowhere. So, yeah, Gossett, I don't know. Gossett, his voice bugs me. His bullshit ability bugs me. It makes me wonder if just, I mean, and again, I don't know anybody. I don't think Cooper confessed to anybody. And, I think that sometimes there are things you do take to your grave. Maybe he told a wife if he had a wife, but I don't know.
I've thought about that so much, because it's like that, two people can keep a secret if one of them is dead.
Yeah.
The idea that you could pull this off, but you're never going to tell a single person.
Yeah, if you lost the money, though, it'd be pretty embarrassing, though, right? It's kind of I mean, that's
at
not
a certain point.
Tell.
I don't even think that's embarrassing.
True.
It maybe in December of 1971, it is embarrassing.
Well,
but by 1985, it is not embarrassing anymore. I did that. I lost the money. It sucks, but I did that. And they're never going to catch me.
Well, and I think that one explanation could be that Cooper died not long after. Perhaps he was sick, and perhaps he did this because he was dying. And when you're terminally ill, why not? Or maybe he wanted to set his family up with some money if he died, if he, had cancer, and maybe he had no life insurance, that sort of thing, right? Because, it's kind of like McCoy. McCoy did this, and that's why, and I've spoken to Shantae McCoy, he did. I've told her this, and your father did this for you guys, really. He said as much. His wife was sick. Karen had some sort of disease or something that made her like physically, not a mental disease, but like a physical. She had some kind of physical bone problem. Maybe her left arm didn't work well or something. I don't know. But she was disabled. And then he has these two small children, and he's making no money. He just found out that he was too old I think he wanted to be like a emergency helicopter pilot for like an EMT or something. I don't know. And they said he was too old to do that, even at like 29. So I think he was he hijacked because he wanted to set his family up, not because he was a greedy son of a bitch like McNally, who just wanted money. So maybe Cooper was like that. Maybe he, I know Melvin Fisher, one of the Cooper copycats. Melvin Fisher's our copycat who had the money strapped to him and sat on the stairs for about 2 hours because he was scared to jump, and then turns himself in to the cockpit. He came that close to jumping out, but he was doing it because he thought he had cancer. He thought he had a brain tumor. No, McCoy thought he had a brain tumor. This guy thought he had a terminal illness too, and was doing it for his family. He had 9 kids. So he was doing it. So maybe Cooper was the same way. Maybe he was, dying and didn't care.
But I thought I read that the McCoy brain tumor thing was something that he potentially said after being arrested. Like,
yeah,
and by the way, I thought that I was dying.
Yeah, I've never seen any documentation that was genuine. So I don't, and I'm not saying that it wasn't either. So might have been. But he definitely said that post facto afterwards. Oh, I was sick, Now, we do have hijackers who said things like Heinemann apparently said that he had 3 months to live or something like that. Heinemann told the crew that Heinemann said a lot of things on his flight, Do we think, so it says LD Cooper's niece said that FBI told her that he's the only suspect they couldn't rule out. Is that actually true? No. In fact, the suspects that the FBI has said, we have their documents. The ones they could not rule out were Fred Catalano, Jason Langseth, and Sheridan Peterson were the ones that they were the 3 that they felt they couldn't rule out. LD, where LD is interesting is that Tina Mucklow said that he's the closest photograph that she's ever seen to Cooper. I have to question that though, because like I said, I've said this a million times. We have a document from 1973 where Tina's like, I can't see this guy's face anymore. And that's 1973. So here we are in 2010, and she sees LD and says, it looks just like Cooper. But it's in the FBI files. So she did say that to the FBI. LD wouldn't be terrible if he had some kind of, his brother worked for Boeing, but I don't think that's enough for me to have LD talking about flaps and arguing about flight plans and things with the crew. Yeah, I don't think so. But LD would be a good suspect. Otherwise, he looks the part. He's definitely swarthy and has a thin nose and has the lip. And
I've tried to understand why LD got that attention in 2011.
I know why. It's Marla.
It is Marla. Marla is so charming. I've met Marla in person. I've talked to her on the phone. I did an interview with her. She is beautiful and she is charming.
That's what it is. It's a good story. You have this blonde bombshell, 40-something lady who's personable, talking about her uncle, and how he showed up all bloody. And of course, I've speculated that she saw him after a DUI because this guy had a felony DUI, which means you have 3 prior DUIs. And now imagine how hard it was to get a DUI, just one in the 60s, where they're like, oh, I'll follow you home, right? Oh, you been drinking? Well, that's about right. Okay, well, follow me home, That sort of thing happened back then. So
especially in smaller towns.
Yeah. So for him to have 3 DUIs, it must have been a habitual drunk driver. I felt that she saw he probably on Thanksgiving or whatever had too much eggnog or whatever and drove off and flipped his Mustang down the road or whatever. And brother Dewey went to go pick his ass up. And that's what Marla saw. Marla saw Dewey bringing LD back from a car wreck or something. He's all bloody, and she's not going to understand what that is when you're 7 years old, and then you're going to say, oh, years later, oh, well, maybe that was because he was injured in the hijacking or something, right? I think that was probably a DUI that she saw,
I've wondered if part of the reason it got so much attention is because it's the 40th anniversary in 2011. And I think at that point, the FBI has this thing. It got some media attention. The FBI didn't go to the media with that. Somebody else did. And they ended up commenting on it. But I think one of the reasons the FBI was like, yeah, it's cool. It's interesting, was they just didn't want to talk about it anymore. So if you have this put forward into the media, they can just be like, yeah, well, that's really interesting. And he's a good suspect. And they can say that. They can say he's a good suspect.
Yeah.
And then not do anything with that.
What's interesting about Ing? Curtis Ing is interesting I've never talked to Curtis, and I'd like to. I believe he's retired now, actually. or he's about to retire. I think Larry said he's really close to retirement. Maybe, no, I think Ing has retired. He works for like a security company, I think. I'd like to. Ing has this. We have this vision of Ing because he sat so stone-faced when Colbert and them were presenting, rack straw stuff. He's just unemotive, just like that. But Ing clearly had a good relationship with Marla. And I have said for a while now that I really think that Ing is who gave Joe Weber access to the 302s. Joe Weber had access to 302s. There's no doubt in my mind. Talk about a gun in my head. Joe said some things that we now know that are like, there's no way in hell that she didn't see those 302s for a little bit. So I think that Joe pestered Ing long enough to where he was like, fine, she probably contacted him and said, I'm outside the building. It's like, oh God, she's here. Joe's going to stalk me in my house if I don't let her in, the FBI. You know what I'm saying? Joe was like that.
She knew inside information somehow.
Yeah. And the agent at the time was Curtis Ing. He was from 2009 to, I think, 2016. He was there when they closed it. Yeah. So he was there. Yeah. So he was case agent from 2009 to 2016. So if it was anybody, it wasn't Larry. Larry was not going to let Joe do anything. And I don't think Joe bothered Larry as much as other people. Maybe Larry just didn't respond to her. I don't know. But Ing must have been nice enough to not just ignore her. So it's like if you don't ignore Joe, she's in there. You spoke to her, right? Did you ever?
Yeah, I spoke to her on the phone a couple of times.
And like you said, you felt that her cognitive decline was already happening.
I felt like it would have been cruel to put her on the air in 2018, 2019, I think was the last time I talked to her.
Well, I think she died in 2022, I think maybe.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. But yeah, she was declining. And that's what they said because she would have been, my God. I mean, it's like, if you want somebody on the Vortex for Cooper, Joe Weber is perfect.
I was planning on flying to Florida to do that interview in person.
Oh, man.
And the first time I talked to her, I was like, I'm not going to be the guy that puts her on the air.
Damn. Yeah.
And then HBO put her on the air like 2 years later.
Yeah, they did. And they had Tim Collins there. It's funny that, it's funny how like how in that documentary, they've got Tim Collins, Joe's memory man. And it's funny is that to me, that's the exact same thing that Bill Mitchell has started calling me at CooperCons. Like, it's funny, like whenever like Eric is interviewing Bill Mitchell every year at CooperCon and Bill gets a question, he'll like do like this and be like, is Ryan out there? Ask Ryan what I said in 1971. I'm like, yeah, Bill, you did say that. Like I remember the one thing, like I remember talking about how Bill saw Cooper's mystery bag on stage and Bill was in the audience going, oh, no, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. And I was like, well, actually you did, Bill. It's in your 302. You said that the guy had a paper bag with him. He's like, oh, well, I guess I did, So it's like that.
See, that's another reason why I don't want to, if I interview one of the people that was on that flight, I'm not asking them about the hijacking. My first question is going to be, all right, when you woke up on Thanksgiving, 1971. Yeah.
Well, I mean, like I said, I've got pretty good access to Bill Mitchell, and those aren't the questions I ask him about the flight because he has no memory. He has a very limited memory of it. I mean, because it was, my God, my favorite thing that Bill says, people say, hey, Bill, look at this photograph. Do you think it looks like Cooper? Bill always says, can you picture the face of a substitute teacher you had in second grade one time? No, you can't see her. And it's the same way for him. He's like, I cannot. Bill likes the vibe. Bill can remember the vibe. He says he wasn't threatened by Cooper. He said the vibe was that the guy was like a nerd, an engineer. Mm-hmm. He just remembers the vibe was off-putting to him because this hot girl was sitting with this dork. That was his thought about it, was that the vibe, he still remembers how it made him feel. Big Cat says Joe got Larry fired. Well, Larry didn't get fired. He got a promotion. So that's not true. Larry took a better job in DC. So he didn't get fired. Now he did get bitched at by his bosses. That's for sure.
Wasn't allowed to talk about the Cooper case in any public way,
which is bizarre. It's like, why? Who cares? And
Yeah, I went through the whole FBI approval process twice and got denied both times. And the second time, hilariously, it was like, your request has been denied and no reason will be given. I'm like, why would you add no reason will be given? That just makes me more curious.
that's so FBI when you FOIA them. They're like, we're not telling you. You're like, why? Because. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, well, I mean, you can't argue with them. What am I going to do? Go take them to court?
Yeah.
No. I mean, they can just tell you no. It's like you tell your kids, because I said so. It's like, that's kind of the way it is with FOIAs. I'm like, hey, can you send me, like, literally, I remember, like, I asked for a clear photograph of, like, Alan Cooper, one of the suspects. And, like, they wrote me back. They said no. And, like, they said, if you have any problems, contact us. I was like, yeah, I do. Why? They're like, well, it was literally, the response was legalese for because I said so. Don't ask again, peasant. It's like, oh, what am I going to do? If they say no, they say no. Foxy asked me, can you do an interview with Robert Blevins? I don't know if Robert would want to talk to me. I mean, maybe I would attack him on Kenny Christensen. I'm not afraid to. Kenny's a terrible suspect. In fact, as I've mentioned several times, I met a flight attendant for Northwest who was there in the 60s and 70s, who knew Alice, knew Tina, knew Flo. Wasn't a huge company. She knew Kenny very well. And she said that when all that stuff about Kenny came out in like 2008 or whatever, her and others were like, oh my God, that was our joke. Like, that was the inside joke among Northwest at the time, was that Kenny was Cooper, and they'd laugh about it. And it was like just an inside joke. Who would think this is real? That Kenny Christensen was, and what's funny about that photograph, after I talked to her, that photograph that Blevins and them always show, right, of Kenny walking into like an apartment or something in December 71, wearing a black coat, holding a bag holding a paper bag and a briefcase. That's a gag photo, in my opinion. Now, knowing that he was part of a joke, he was in on the joke, I think that photo can easily be explained as just being a gag photo, that he was like, that he would show to his friends on the airline. Oh, see, it is me. Ha ha ha. Here's the photograph of me, just as a joke.
And wasn't he also like the union steward for Northwest Orient Airlines?
Sounds about right. Yeah. He was there forever.
You're like the representative between the employees and the union.
Right.
You don't think that your coworkers are going to recognize you?
Well, it's not just that. It's not just recognizing you in the hijacking. It's the fact that he worked there for 20 more years.
Yes.
So maybe you're going to run into Flo or Tina or Alice at a later date and not know it. I mean, it's so preposterous for me to think about when you actually think about Kenny. And I'm the same way as you. I saw the Nat Geo special. I was like, well, damn, that sounds really intriguing about this guy. I went out and read Into the Blast, and you're like, oh, well, maybe so. And then you go, well, you start really to think about it. Like, I think that a problem with Cooper is we don't really think about, it's almost a fantasy in a weird way. It's like, think about, I tell people all the time, imagine Cooper was a real human being. Obviously, he was a real guy like us, real person. Imagine you waking up tomorrow and going, I'm going to go hijack a plane with dynamite. Like, in the real world, this isn't fantasy. This thing actually happened. This guy woke up that morning, put his pants on, tied his zipped up his shoes, didn't tie his shoes, not non-tie shoes, but he put his shoes on, had a bagel for breakfast. You know what I'm saying? This was a real human being and walked onto a plane with a bomb. Like, this guy was not just some regular person.
Definitely not.
I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is not like a joke, like a parlor game. Oh, maybe this guy was Cooper. This guy was intense. Intense. It wasn't a flippant thing for him to do. That's all I'll say. We'll wrap it up soon, but Angie Voigt will say, good question. Great question to wrap up on. Angie says, what are the 3 best Vortex episodes for newcomers to the podcast? A question for both of us. I'll let you answer, obviously. If you could pick 3.
If I can pick 3, number 1 is the first episode that I did with Bruce Smith. That's number 1. Number 2 and 3. For number 2, I'm just going to say Tim Collins.
Oh yeah.
Those are so incredible. I don't care how you feel about Dwayne or Joe Weber. Those episodes are incredible. And then another episode that I really, really like. I'm so happy with most of them. I'll do the interview and then Russell puts it together and then I listen back and then it goes live on the air. So I was involved in the conversation and then I listened to it at least once before it went on the air. And often I will listen to it again once it goes on the air, or, I'm going to have somebody back on. There are so few episodes where I'm angry at myself. And that's what I'm the most self-critical person, that it's so weird that I'm so happy with so many of my episodes. Like I listened to the one I did with Marty. I've listened to that all the way through 3 times.
Yeah.
So I was a part of that conversation and I listened to the entirety 3 times.
Damn.
And I'm just so pleased with myself about the Cooper Vortex.
They're all great.
And there isn't anything else in my life that's like that. I've built some really cool stuff before, but I always sort of pick it apart or wish I would have done this differently or that differently. There are Vortex episodes I think aren't good, but there are the Vortex episodes where I'm unhappy with myself are very few. Very few. There are times where I was like, oh, I wish I would have said that differently, or that joke was stupid. But generally, I'm pretty happy with them. But, I mean, I guess I would just say for number 3, the one I did most recently with Marty, or the next episode I did. I don't want to say who it was, but that episode, I loved it. I loved it.
Looking
I woke
forward to that
up
one.
that morning and I was just like, damn, that was so fun. And I just had a great time talking to him.
Yeah, he's a good interview. I know who it is. I won't say it, but he's a really good interview. He's very articulate and
he's great.
Funny.
And I love doing a suspect episode, and I love doing an episode with someone that has no suspect because I can handle it differently. If you're coming on and you're pitching your suspect, I want to help you tell your story and get it out. And I want to, if you didn't bring up some evidence I know for your suspect, I'm going to bring that up to help promote them. But if I know that you don't have a suspect and you're just skeptical of everything and nothing's true and I don't know about that and I'm just going to stick to the facts, I like that interview too because I can handle it differently.
Yeah. I would say that if for 3 episodes, obviously I'm going number 1, the Tim Collins ones. I'll say those are probably my favorite things ever in podcast form, ever.
Wow, high praise.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big I like Dan Carlin, Hardcore History, amazing stuff. Sam Harris has some cool stuff, but I the Tim Collins episodes, just seek those out if you've not listened to those. Regardless of Dwayne, it doesn't matter. It's still just he's a great storyteller. He's compelling, and it makes you go, well, maybe it was Dwayne. Number 2, I like Marty's one about surviving the jump. Is a good one.
Yeah, his first episode on the show. I was so excited about that one.
Yeah.
I just remember like a week before thinking like, this is great. I've made it. I got Marty on the show.
Yeah. Right. Because he's an author. Yeah. And I would say I like Drew Beeson's shows about Braden.
Oh, those are great too. Drew Beeson was my first guest that asked to be on the show, which was a huge deal for me then.
Oh.
He reached out and was like, hey, I'm working on this thing and I think it's interesting. And, I would like to be on your show. And I want to say I'd done like 10 episodes at that point or something.
Right.
And the idea that somebody reached out to me, I was like, this is crazy. I've made it. I'm so famous. Can you believe this?
I know. Right. Yeah, I know. And then it becomes a burden. Like I get emails from people all the time now. I'm like the guy now. I mean, I know you do too. We get these emails now from people who are cranks. But you know what? I'm always respectful because you never know.
Yeah.
when it's going to be the real one. I will always at least entertain for a moment something. I'm not going to dismiss somebody just immediately unless they're saying it was Zodiac or something, right? I mean, but
If you have a lead,
yeah,
I will entertain your email. If you reach out and say, "Hey, I listened to a couple episodes, and what do you think of this idea? He never jumped from the plane." I'm not responding.
yeah,
But if you reach out and are like, "Hey, I know this is ridiculous, but my family has always kind of thought my grandpa might be involved in this and that," I am responding to that email right away.
yeah.
And I've done that many times, and sometimes I regret it. I used to give my phone number out pretty loosey goosey,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a mistake.
Mm.
I remember one time standing in my yard. I was like digging a trench to put an electrical line for my well at my house in Idaho. Hand digging a trench. It's super hot out. I get this phone call, and I've been dealing with this guy, and I've been waiting for him to call me, and it seemed so interesting and so promising. And I finally got him on the phone, and he was a complete raving lunatic, and everything was connected and blah, blah, blah. And I just remember like standing out in my yard. I had stopped what I was doing to take this phone call. And I just remember standing like, what the hell am I doing with my
Moment of
life?
clarity. Yeah.
Like, why am I bringing this into my life? I'm talking to a crazy person on my phone for no reason
Right.
that
Wasted
I
time.
begged to call me.
Yeah. Well, it's like, you said that, I remember you actually only once did you ever end an interview. You did that recently.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell us
Yeah.
about that real quick.
It wasn't that long ago. It was probably within the last year. I had a guy on. It seemed super promising. He had this lead that I thought was interesting. But once I got him on the air, and part of this is my fault because, like I said, I do like to, the first time I talk to you, I want it to be the 10 minutes in Zoom before we do the interview.
Right.
And in that 10 minutes, I was like, this isn't going to go well.
Mm.
And I started the recording, and instantly he just starts like naming names and this crime and this crime, and they're still alive and this person sucks. And I just stopped it. I was like, hey man, I can't put this out and be the first place this all goes public.
Yeah.
If you put out a book and a doc and a movie and that's all in the public, then we can talk about it.
Sure.
But I am not going to be the one whose air you come on to slander these people that are alive.
Right. Yeah.
Because his suspect wasn't alive, but it was like tangentially involved with these other people. And he started naming that. And I was just like, hey, we're going to cancel this until you get this figured out and bring it on somewhere else. And then we can talk about it. And of course that would never happen because nobody else is going to do that.
No, that guy actually came on the Facebook group and was like, you can come talk to DB, talking to me. He's like, you can come talk to DB Cooper for $10,000. I was like, okay. I said, I was joking. I was like, do you mean it? I was like, do you want PayPal or Venmo? He was like, yeah, those apps work fine. I was like, I'm not paying you. But that was that guy. So yeah, I remember that guy. But you know what though? Sometimes you get these cool ones. Like and I will not name names, obviously, but I know you and I have spoken to the same individual who thinks his brother was Cooper. And if his brother's just too young. But
it's way too young, yeah.
Boy, oh boy, if his brother was 10 years older, it would be about as good as it gets. I talked to this guy for a couple hours on the phone, and I was almost in tears because I'm like, oh my God. I was like, please, why can't this suspect be, 10 years older, 15 years older? It was just like, God, because it is so freaking perfect. It's like, and everything is wrapped up perfectly. His Cooper dies not long after. It's like just everything is so friggin' perfect. And part of me, like he even has me because it's such a good story. And he's so genuine. And it's real though. The thing is, he's not making this up. Like the things that he he thinks his brother was Cooper for various reasons. And the things that he tells you, I vetted him. I looked it up. He's a guy. He's notable. He's an honest citizen. I looked up the claims about his brother from the 60s and 70s. All true. All in the news, all in the newspapers. And I'm just like, like I was sweating almost in tears. I was like, what? You know,
here's the problem I've had with that gentleman in particular. Not only the age being young, but when you talk to him about when this really came to mind, it's like unsolved mysteries. And that's where I start to feel like Kenny Christensen's sort of the same thing, where it's like, oh, maybe it could have been this person because it fits that, but then the evidence doesn't support it. And I unfortunately feel like that's where that suspect lands. You're right. The story is great. And if the story could match with a suspect, boy, would that be perfect. Yeah. But it's a perfect story that matches with someone that is not a suspect.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's. I mean, yeah, I agree. And when you're that off by the age, when you're that off of it, and I told the guy, I said, look, man, I would love to support you, but I have been on the record destroying McCoy and Rackstraw for being in their 20s. I can't get you there. I cannot make this a middle-aged man. Like the fact that you think and this problem with the Rackstraw stuff.
And isn't he like 25, 26? He was
24
younger.
At the time.
24. Yeah. It's so crazy. The idea that Tina wouldn't be like, this guy's 2 years older than me.
Yeah.
Or this guy is 25 years older than me.
Yeah. It's like this. It's like, again, get a girl who was in her. So Tina Mucklos, get a girl who's a senior in college right now. Get a girl, University of Oregon. Okay. A senior. Put her on a plane next to a guy who is only a year or two older than her. A guy who's like law school age, graduate school age, right? And then have her come off the plane and say that the guy was her father's age. It's absurd to think there wouldn't be just the way you talk to somebody, language even. I mean, Cooper's age is not just in the way he looks, it's the way he acted. He was doing dad jokes and things.
One thing that I hate hearing is, well, back then people looked older.
Yeah.
Yes, they did. But it's contemporary.
Relative.
Yeah. I wouldn't say now that a 50-year-old person from 71 is the same as a 50-year-old person from 2024.
No.
They're different. The average 50-year-old person today would look younger than the 100%. Average 50-year-old person in 71.
Yes.
But you know what the average person in 1971 would say? Oh, they look like an average 50-year-old.
Yeah, exactly. It's all relative.
Yeah.
And then Nikki's asking, how about Rodney Bonifield? Good God.
I refuse to talk about that movie. I've promoted every single DB Cooper project. I promote DB Cooper versus Bigfoot, and that's softcore gay pornography.
Yeah.
But I will not promote that terrible project that nobody should watch at all. It's garbage. It's done poorly. It's the wrong story. They could have looked at Wikipedia and realized that whole thing was bullshit.
Well, like I said in my review, in the video where I reviewed that movie, I said Brad Pitt from Moneyball. There are good DB Cooper documentaries. There are average DB Cooper documentaries. Then there's 50 Feet of Crap. Then there's I Am DB Cooper. It's so bad, and I just don't like I said, if this was meant to be like sarcastic, it would be the Citizen Kane of like sarcastic docudramas. But no, they actually think that this guy who was 19 years old. I
don't even believe that. I don't think that they believed it. I think they just thought we could make a documentary about this.
Make money off of it. Yeah, maybe. God, like I said, if you watch it though, those filmmakers are interviewed in the film and they're like, oh, this guy. Well, the one quote that the kid goes, he goes, this guy's like Jesus. He goes, either everything he's saying is true or everything he's saying is so obnoxiously wrong that it's like he's fooling everybody. But no, he fooled you if you actually believe that. Nikki says that this guy did a podcast recently where he says he still thinks Rodney Bonifield was Cooper, the 19-year-old.
Yeah, and then did he promote that movie a few seconds later?
I'm
Because
sure.
they have no distribution. They have no distribution. It's such a small film. That's the only thing that I'm thankful for.
It's on
is because
YouTube for free.
yeah, but DB Cooper versus Bigfoot has been seen by way more people.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. I started to try to review that one. I was like, okay, I'm not reviewing this thing.
You didn't make it all the way through?
No, I did not. Well, I tried to look for DB Cooper. He's only at the very end.
I think there's like 3 short clips that he's in that whole movie, maybe for a total of maybe 2 minutes of screen time.
Again,
It's such a great movie. I love the scene where it's all like the shirtless guys working out alone at the super nice house in the middle of nowhere. And then he just like knocks on the door and they open it and comes inside. It's such a weird movie.
It's strange. Why would you make that? I don't understand. Pete asked about what we think about Bryant Kofelt. I don't know how much you know about Bryant Kofelt, but
well, I read The Last of the Lincolns.
Okay.
But it's been a while. Also, my only DB Cooper book, or one of very few books that my dog has ever chewed up, because she thought that book was such bullshit that she wasn't even going to stand for it.
So she chewed that one up.
Yeah, and I wasn't bothered enough to get another copy because even if it sits on my shelf as a DB Cooper book, nobody really gets that connection.
Yeah, no, Flo, Kofelt's interesting in some ways because we know he wasn't DB Cooper because he was actually, they verified that he was actually in a alcohol rehab facility at the time in DC. Okay, so he wasn't Cooper, but we do have Florence Schaffner. It's really odd. The Kofelt thing is really weird. If you actually read the FBI files about Kofelt, it's really interesting. It's really interesting how, because basically the producer cornered Flo, long and short of it, in 1976 or so. This guy cornered Flo at an airport and shoved this photograph in front of her. And allegedly, here's a photograph of Kofelt. And allegedly, she goes, "Oh my God, I never thought I'd see that face again." Okay, so there's Bryant Kofelt there. She said, "Oh my God, I never thought to see that face again." George LeBissonniere, passenger, allegedly ID'd this as being DB Cooper. Bryant Kofelt. Bryant Kofelt was 56 years old, was an alcoholic, had no parachuting experience or aviation experience at all. Was basically just a con man, essentially. But what's interesting about it, though, is that so these people were making a documentary about, or they wanted to make a documentary about Kofelt, and they wanted Florence to like sign on.
Wait, this guy's different than Jack.
Jack Bryant Kofelt, same name.
Okay. I was like, wait, am I confusing them?
No, same guy.
Okay.
And so they actually, so Flo flew out to LA, to Hollywood in 76 or 77 and talked with these guys and also their stuff. And they wanted her to sign an affidavit saying that she ID'd this photograph as being Cooper, yada, yada, yada. So the FBI finds out about this. And the FBI, we have this 302 where the FBI contacts Flo and says, look, and they sent the same, because this guy, this Kofelt backer, Kofelt was dead at this point. Kofelt had died in like 76. So this producer, this Hollywood producer, he got in touch. He got in touch with Radchek. He got in touch with Tina. Like Tina had him over at her apartment. This guy, he was obviously very charming, whoever this guy was. He weaseled his way into the crew. So the FBI sends this document, and it's in the FBI files. They send it to Tina, to Flo, to Rat, probably to Alice too, and say, look, we're not saying that you can't talk to people about this and even make a profit off of it. But keep in mind, if you give out any information, if this guy is still alive, you could be prosecuted for aiding and abetting his escape. So it was almost like, wink, wink, shut the hell up or else. And honestly, that is why I really think that we haven't heard much. We didn't hear much in the 80s and the 90s from Tina and Radicek and those people. Flo did Unsolved Mysteries, and so did Captain Scott. But I really think that had a real chilling effect on the crew, on the witnesses, that the FBI said, you.
Of course it would.
Yeah, it was a threat. It's a threat. I mean, they're not being cute about it. They meant it. They're like, you better shut up or else. So it was a cool document to see. And sure enough, Florence is like, okay, I'll leave it alone. And Flo says, I'm not going to deal with it. And they asked Tina, the FBI goes, what did you tell this guy? She goes, well, I just showed him my scrapbook. Poor Tina. You know, Tina has this little scrapbook she has in like the HBO documentary, I think. She's like, hi, I'm Tina. Here's my scrapbook of all the. It's kind of cute that Tina actually kept clippings of things from the hijacking. It's interesting that she would even want to do that. She's like, well, I showed him my scrapbook that I have. And they're like, what did you show him in the scrapbook? And she's like, well, but what's interesting about Kofelt is that there's an article that was published in like Las Vegas magazine by this same producer guy in the 80s. And there are some details in there that are interesting that make you go, is he really going to misquote Flo? Right? Flo's still alive. Would this guy misquote a living person for a article in a real magazine that was published? Probably not. And one of the cool takeaways was that Flo says that she saw him put on boots at some point before she left the plane. Maybe Tina just never saw it, but she says that she saw Kofelt, Cooper, whoever, put on boots. She also says that when Cooper came out of the bathroom, because Cooper goes in the bathroom when Tina goes to get the money. Flo is actually standing back there when Cooper. So Cooper had all the passengers move up about 4 or 5 rows from where they were sitting. So there's nobody back there. During the money exchange, Captain Scott told Flo, and this is all in the FBI files. Okay, Captain Scott tells Flo to go stand back there, you know, and make sure no passengers come back where Cooper wanted them to come back from. And this is when Cooper goes to the bathroom. In this Kofelt article in this magazine in the 80s, Flo says that when Cooper came out of the bathroom, he hit her with the door. That for some reason she was back there, and that the door hit him, or the door hit her when he opened it. So and that's a really weird detail. She also says that Cooper asked for the money in 20s. Okay, so he wanted $20,000 in 20s, and she forgot to write that down on the ransom.
Yeah, but what year is this interview?
In the early 80s.
See, now I don't believe it.
Well, hang on. Here, this is going to be a big reveal one day, and I'm putting it in my book. And no, I'm not telling a single soul about this, about where it comes from. But this thing about, she said that when the money was brought on in 20s, she said, oh, thank God, because I had forgot to write down that he put for 20s. I have Tina Mucklow saying the same thing. And I will not tell a soul where I got that from. But from her own mouth, Tina Mucklow said that Cooper asked for 20s and that they forgot to put it on the ransom. And that they were pleased when the money showed up as 20s. So that's all. And then
it goes back to, did Cooper know that there was a pile of cash available in 20s?
In that bank, yeah. Hard to say. So anyway, well, we've gone on over 3 hours, folks. We have been shooting the shit with my great friend Darren. And Darren,
yeah, I got to go to bed. Some of us actually have to work. You're just pretending to work. Everyone in the Vortex knows that you stopped working a long time ago, and you just pretend to work.
Yes, I'm actually a class action lawyer. I got a big lawsuit. I got a huge payday out of a class action spilled coffee suit years ago. Yes, I'm just
typical lawyer.
Lawyers, typical lawyers. Yes, and so Darren will have. What about one last thing? What about the bathroom Mile High Club conspiracy? That actually does come from a Penthouse. Penthouse wrote an article about Kofelt actually in the same time period. And it is a Penthouse article. It's like, you know, Cooper is grabbing Tina's ass and things like that. You know, there's no, that's where Bruce got that from. Bruce has this whole.
Bruce got it from Galen.
Yeah. And Galen got it from that article. I guarantee you. So anyway,
I don't know. I don't see there's that story that is a little bit interesting, and it only surrounds Wolfgang.
what the Tina being harassed by Cooper?
Yes,
Wolfgang
some
thing?
sort of at the very least I've heard making out, and at the very most it was more of an assault.
Don't buy
And
that.
it only surrounds Wolfgang.
Yeah, he was very nice. He was not impolite to me in any way. I don't buy it. So
I don't. I'm not saying I believe that, but it's interesting that it's only surrounds Wolfgang.
Well, it surrounds God. It surrounds Cofield actually.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
It is in this Cofield article about him grabbing her
But
ass.
nobody thinks he's a real suspect.
No. I mean, now at the time, the FBI, look, there's probably more FBI files about Cofield than any other person except for Jason Langseth. They really went to town on trying to figure out, because like I said, when Flo apparently says, I never thought I'd see that face again. I mean, that's kind of makes you go, ooh, you know, so the FBI did investigate him a lot. But your next episode, I'll let you go, but your next episode, we won't say who it is, but hopefully coming out soon.
I would say in the next 7 days for sure.
Nice. All right. Well, it's a good one, and it's one of my good friends, and Darren's
gonna be great. And then I'm recording on Sunday with
the bomb guy,
bomb expert, who, I'm gonna make a note to thank. I had a fan reach out because it was a great idea that I requested that on the air, because I had 2 different people reach out, recommending 2 different folks, but I got a banger.
I cannot.
So I'll make sure and thank that fan in the episode.
Well, I'm dying for that. And then of course, hopefully you'll get John Limbach on to talk about Skip Hall at some point.
I haven't asked him yet, but I'm sure he'd be more than glad to come on the show. I'm enjoying the book so far. And you know, like I mentioned, I don't like the one suspect to connect all the crimes, but I am a sucker for the angle
the JFK
that John is using with this. Could be involved in something else. I'm a huge sucker for that, so he got me.
Well, we'll be on. Actually, me and Limbach will be on with Alan Kelly and I forget his name, but one of the guys. I'm actually going to be. I know nothing about it, but I'm going to be on a Finn show tomorrow, so I'll be doing that. Pete's guide says to make sure. Just ask the bomb expert if a number 6 dry cell could trigger TNT. So there you go. That's the one to.
Will do.
Obviously. So anyway, all right, folks. Well, we're wrapping it up, and thank you so much, Darren. I really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure. I love talking about DB Cooper, and no one in my real life will ever do it. So this was fun.
The same way too. So, well, okay. Well, Darren's pod with his cool guests will be coming out in the next few weeks, and we're gearing back up for more Vortex episodes. So we will talk to you guys again soon. Be good. Bye.